This video was made possible thanks to the support of my YouTube members and my patrons. Pledge today and you can get early video access, your name in the credits, and more. Links in the description. 2023 was a celebratory year for Doctor Who. The institution's 60th birthday resulted in TV specials, documentaries, books, and of course, Big Finish audio releases. For 2022, I put together a feature-length guide to all of the releases I listened to during that year, and a lot of you guys enjoyed and appreciated that breakdown, so we're bringing it back again for 2023, where I listened to over 60 releases. And when you lay out that actual number, 60 releases over the span of a single year, yeah, I can see why people would find a resource like this pretty useful. Big Finish Productions sends me review copies of their audio dramas, so let me wade through almost every Doctor Who release of the last year, and I'll let you know what's happening in this corner of the expanded universe and which releases and ranges you should be prioritizing, culminating with a top 10 releases of the year ranking. 2022 was an interesting year for Big Finish, as it started to emphasize standalone box sets and story arcs rather than the shorter monthly ranges of the past. Many of these story arcs we started talking about last year came to a conclusion in 2023, with more starting up and more experimental long-form stories, most notably Once and Future, the Diamond Anniversary release featuring almost all incarnations of the Doctor. If you have a favourite Doctor or want to learn more about a specific range, I will leave timestamps in the description for you as we go in chronological Doctor order. But before we dive in, let me briefly talk about the releases and ranges I won't be covering. Not because I don't think they're any good or worth listening to, but some of the ranges are mid-story arc and I haven't started them, such as the Robots and Unit Nemesis, so I'm afraid if you want to learn about those releases, I can't help you there. I also won't be diving into the compilations or re-releases from previous sets, like Excelis Collected, which is a re-release of a trilogy of stories from the early 2000s starring Anthony Head as Greyvorn, or the re-release of the first series of the 8th Doctor Adventures with Lucy Miller, or the re-release of Terror of the Master. I barely have time to go through all of their current releases, let alone their decades-old back catalogue. Sorry, but my time machine invention has not been completed yet. With that out of the way, let's start with the first Doctor. The original, you might say.
Oh, judging by the technology and the people I've observed in protective masks, I should say, immediately post-21st century pandemic.
In 2022, Big Finish gave the first Doctor Adventures a creative reboot by casting Stephen Noonan as the Doctor and paired him up with Lauren Cornelius as Dodo. With that year's The Outlaws setting the template, the follow-up release, The Demon Song, started branching the range into more interesting directions. While the first box set felt like an extension of First Doctor stories like The Time Meddler, The Romans, and The Celestial Toymaker, it feels with The Demon Song that producer Mark Wright wanted to put the original incarnation in settings and scenarios that you usually wouldn't see this version in. Case in point, The Demon Song by Bob Ayers is a two-parter which takes place in the early 2020s, with the Doctor even pointing out how many people are wearing face masks due to the recent pandemic. It feels so strange for this version of the character firmly locked into the 1960s as their quote present-day London, but this is a series about time travel, and it tells a brief but effective story about a subliminal melody on the streets of Camden that's causing people to go missing. We get an online influencer in the cast, and it's actually not the cringiest thing imaginable, which is quite a feat, and we get a cool creature concept in a hidden in plain sight type of way. But for me, it's really the setting that makes this a memorable story. There's not a lot for Dodo to do, however, which is a shame considering how good Lauren Cornelius is in this role. And with the next story, a four-parter written by Nicholas Briggs called The Inchiton Incident, we find the first Doctor and Dodo stumbling across a Cold War-esque conspiracy in a coastal town in England after the Second World War. This is a strong espionage thriller, which separates the Doctor and Dodo as they explore a military base where there's an alien presence. The Doctor teams up with an American spy, played by Genevieve Gaunt, to sneak into the base with Dodo already inside learning more. Great character dynamics throughout, with the Inchiton Incident's main issue being a rather abrupt ending to the A-plot because Part 4 needs to heavily pivot to set up the rest of of the First Doctor adventures, which has the Doctor disappear due to unknown forces, leaving Dodo alone, which leads into the 2024 release, Fugitive of the Daleks. The main issue with this range is that we're only getting one per year because that's all we've got in terms of dedicated First Doctor releases, but it's great to see that with the Demon Song that the creative team are putting this underserved Doctor-companion relationship in interesting settings and pairing them up with well-rounded characters. Stephen Noonan and Lauren Cornelius were already doing great work with their performances as the First Doctor and Dodo, but with the Demon Song it really feels like they've hit their stride and are really excelling with the material. While I do think that the 2022 release of The Outlaws gives us the better stories, the directions the Demon Song takes does bode well for this new era of the original Doctor. Speaking of few releases every year,
I don't mind being in danger, Raven. For better or for worse, I have chosen to put myself in danger. But I will not abide anyone putting my friends in harm's way like that. Is that understood?
Much like the First Doctor, the Second Doctor only had a couple of releases this year, opening the year strong with an audio novel, The Dead Star, written by Kate Orman, a long-time writer for the Doctor Who Expanded Universe. This 7-hour audio adventure starts off as a disaster movie, with the Doctor, Ben and Polly navigating an empty London which is literally folding in on itself. In order to prevent this apocalypse, the TARDIS team investigates a group of London scientists, with the narrative shifting into an existential threat as black holes threaten to swallow up creation. It's really heavy on the cosmic horror, including one set piece where the team are floating around in a space station where tiny microscopic black holes are fixed in place, but they don't know where. The wrong move and they'd be torn apart, and it's legit scary stuff. It's narrated by Patrick Troughton's son, Michael Troughton, who does a terrific job, especially as his late father, but the standout here is the prose and the horror of black holes and the great unknown. A really atmospheric listen, genuine peril. I liked this a lot. It's been over a year since I listened to it, and I'm still remembering set pieces and moments from it, and if that's not a recommendation, I don't know what is. Like the First Doctor, the Second Doctor's full cast audio dramas are currently only limited to one per year, which is a shame because they're telling lengthy story arcs, and they're also really good, so they feel like long waits. In 2022, Beyond Wargames took the Second Doctor out of his regeneration. Played by Michael Troughton, he's rescued by the Time Lord Raven, played by a frightening Emma Noakes, to do unsanctioned missions for the Time Lords. After some relatively standard missions, Raven assesses that the Doctor does better with a companion and sets him up with an elderly James Robert McCrimmon, played by Fraser Hines, playing his actual age. This box set, suitably titled James Robert McCrimmon, has 3 stories, the first of which being Jamie, by Mark Wright, set in 1776 Scotland, where Jamie has been sentenced to the dungeons of Edinburgh Castle due to hallucinations and dreams of adventures throughout time and space, due to some convoluted reasons because the Time Lords botched his memory wipe. There's a great gothic sensibility to the story, with a wraith villain and also Fraser Hines pulling double duty as an older Jamie and a potential doppelganger. I wasn't fawning over this story, but a lot of people absolutely loved it when it came out, and it became their favourite of the set, and honestly, I can still see why. For me, the standout part was having Raven almost act as the Doctor's pseudo-companion while Jamie is incapacitated, because it's such a fascinating pairing as we learn about just what Raven's deal is. But my favourite story of the box set, and broadly speaking one of my favourites of the year, was The Green Man by Paul F. Verhoeven, which takes place sometime later, where the Second Doctor and Jamie have been adventuring across the universe doing missions for the Time Lords, which ties into the Annihilators box set from 2022 and also the 1985 TV story The Two Doctors, and the opening portion is legitimately funny as we get caught up on all of these adventures through Family Guy style cutaways before the story settles on the Doctor and Jamie being sent by Raven to a rehab centre to investigate a missing Time Lord. But because the Doctor and Jamie really want a holiday, they deliberately delay their investigation until the threat of the titular Green Man is thrust upon them. It's a brilliant comedy of errors, which seems to take inspiration from Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window as random plant life starts sprouting up in the garden. The Doctor is made ill to make their infiltration more credible, which means that Jamie needs to take the reins, and due to him being a seasoned Second Doctor companion, he's more than up to the task. Due to Jamie being older and wiser, despite these being the same characters as we saw in the 1960s, it feels like a fresh dynamic with Troughton and Hines bouncing off each other really well, but one of the standout moments is near the end, with a confrontation between the second Doctor and Raven, where we hear this Doctor get angry. We're so used to the cosmic hobo or the bumbling Doctor with the oversized jacket and the recorder, but with this material, Michael Troughton rises to the occasion. It's an elevation of the character that I really want from these box sets involving black and white Doctors. Raven is such a terrific ongoing antagonist for these sets, and Emma Noakes' performance is legitimately chilling, playing a Time Lord who is bad, who knows it, and is able to follow through on any threats she makes. The Green Man is funny without nullifying the immediate stakes. The structure unfurls, or should I say blossoms, over the 2 parts, and I just loved it. This is Paul F. Verhoeven's first credit on Big Finish full cast audio drama, and I genuinely cannot wait to see what he does next. The best debut writer of 2023, in my opinion. As for the last story in the set, The Shroud by Bob Ayers, its main issue is following the Green Man. We've got a base under siege story, so you know this is a second Doctor adventure down to the bone marrow. Set on the planet Nineveh, which has been overcome by a perpetual darkness, a group of resistance fighters are in combat against the Squids, and in order to defeat them, they're using devices called Dreamscopes to help them see in the dark. But things take a turn when the Doctor is kidnapped, and the reason for Raven sending him and Jamie there are revealed, though I won't be spoiling that here. The Shroud works for the same reason the other 2 stories in the box set work, and that's the breezy 2-part format, which makes the pacing feel more modern, contrasted with the 4 or sometimes 10-parters of the second Doctor era. It allows the James Robert McCrimmon box set to visit a variety of settings and give us a diverse set of stories. If the Shroud was any longer, it might have come across as a slog, but as a 2-parter, it's very well paced, and while Jamie does not have much to do in this particular story, it's a great premise for an alien invasion story, where the darkness kills all life but keeps the infrastructure, which makes the planet easier to inhabit after the invasion. Really satisfying end to the box set and leads into the 3rd in this series. Spoiler alert, this box set is making my top 10 for the end of the year, and I really hope they manage to release more than one of these a year. Bring on Volume 3. Speaking of 3...
Coming and going, dipping into lives and disappearing out of them, I'm aware that every fleeting moment is precious. The most dazzling dragonfly might live for a week, or the daisiest daisy may only bloom for an hour in the sun. I won't be around forever. None of us will. The fact that you've seen that other fellow with the bow tie, well, it means one day I'll be gone too.
Tim Treloar continues to star as the 3rd Doctor, filling in for the late Jon Pertwee, with 2022 setting aside the multi-story box set format and leaning into the faithful and lengthy 6 to 7 part stories from the season 7 days. 2023 seemed to combine these 2 approaches for 2 box sets, one of which was a season 7 style story following the 3rd Doctor, Liz Shaw and the Brigadier, and the other reunited the 3rd Doctor with an older Jo Grant, or Jo Jones, after the in-universe passing of her husband Clifford, canonised after the passing of actor Stuart Bevan. We'll talk about that one first. The return of Jo Jones gives us a trilogy of 2-parters, very similar in format to the second Doctor's James Robert McCrimmon box set, and while I remember liking the box set enough at the time, I confess I could not remember any specifics outside of the really heart-wrenching conclusion to the first story, Supernature, by Matt Fitton, where the 3rd Doctor and Jo give an in-universe send-off to Cliff. That was lovely, but I had to go back and watch my immediate video review because I really retained nothing else here. I think a big reason for that is because outside of the 3rd story, The Iron Shore by Lizzie Hopley, there's not a lot to chew on when it comes to the plots and the themes. Supernature is just a bog-standard environmental story about a big new human MacGuffin upsetting the local wildlife, which Jo investigates and meets up with the 3rd Doctor again. It ends predictably. There's a really arch podcaster character who I genuinely think just up and disappears midway through the story with no explanation, and while the soundscapes of the coastal setting are effective, this is just your bog-standard Terrance Dicks or Malcolm Hulke style 3rd Doctor adventure that mainly sets to recalibrate where these characters are now. and that this box set does very effectively. My first thought was whether or not this would belittle Jo's reunion with the 11th Doctor in 2010's The Sarah Jane Adventures episode The Death of the Doctor. However, this box set takes place after that from Jo's perspective, which was a clever approach to take and serves to make Jo a character who deeply loves and cares about the Doctor, but she's her own person, who has been without him before and is more independent than the third Doctor thinks. Jo has emotionally matured, no longer screams her way out of situations, and is just as well travelled as the Doctor is, and the Doctor loves that about her. He's surprised and there's an adjustment period, but it feels like a natural continuation for these two. They can't just pick up where they left off after the Green Death, and nor should they. It's just a shame that while the character work between the two is so strong, the stories in this box set can't really match it, as the second story, The Conservators by Felicia Barker, may have a strong premise of the Doctor and Jo landing in an authoritarian society, definitely not based on modern day Tory austerity, absolutely not, who would dare suggest such a thing, and the third Doctor is infused with nanomachines because he's considered a threat, meaning Jo has to do most of the heavy lifting. I didn't find the political commentary very insightful, and when we get to the third act and we have an activist character who we're meant to root for, but then we root against them when they do a heel turn and want to destroy the universe, the story loses credibility. Now, the third story, The Iron Shore by Lizzie Hopley, is a genuinely unnerving ghost story as we meet Callus, a man burdened with a family curse, played by Tom Alexander. Part the Captain's Log chapter from Bram Stoker's Dracula, part that episode of Tugs with the Cursed Boat, The Iron Shore is the unquestionable highlight of the box set with a chilling mid-story cliffhanger, great sound design, and a performance high point by Tim Treloar's third Doctor. Loved it. The return of Jo Jones has an open ending should Big Finish want to continue the further adventures of the third Doctor and Jo, and while this box set shows the creatives have a handle on the characters, the stories themselves might need to push the boat out and get more experimental. Oh, and since I wrote this portion, another installment has been announced, a Cyberman story written by Lauren Mooney and Stuart Pringle. Hyped doesn't even begin to describe it for me. Speaking of slow burns, we get the obligatory Season 7 callback release with a 7-part epic adventure set while the Doctor is earthbound and working for UNIT. We have Intelligence for War, written by Eddie Robson, which is a great espionage thriller that opens with a Nazi soldier attacking a quaint rural village and unfurls into an alien invasion that is hoping to usurp UNIT as the dominant military presence in the country that deals with extraterrestrial threats. What I loved about this story is not only the pacing, like this does not feel like a 7-parter, but how this was a great Liz Shaw story. Daisy Ashford fills in for her late mother, and we learn more about her backstory and her university days, which would make Malcolm Hulke proud. Side note, did you know that MI5 had a file on Malcolm Hulke, a card-carrying communist? What a chad. The story starts with that Nazi attack and then gradually unfurls into a terrific thriller that fills in a lot of gaps in the world regarding the Brigadier, Liz, and the state of Whoniverse politics. There's a really clever application of alien weaponry and how the tech can be used for espionage, which keeps the listener on their toes because we don't know who can be trusted. Loved this story. It's probably my favourite third Doctor story since 2021's The Devil's Hoofprints. I wish John Colshaw's Brigadier had a bit more to do, but aside from that, I have very few complaints. Next up, while the third Doctor has been returning to his roots with old companions and old faithful formats, his successor has been charting new frontiers.
Hello, is this the security office? I'm the Doctor. I thought I'd better introduce myself as we're bound to end up working together. This anyone's seat? No? Good, yes. Something's afoot, things are awry, etc., etc. But never mind. Here I am!
In 2022, the fourth Doctor started his 11th season of audio adventures with a box set called Soho, which was set between Season 14's The Deadly Assassin and The Face of Evil, where Tom Baker's Doctor is travelling without a companion. I didn't really rate the box set, but it did introduce the character of Margaret, played by Nerys Hughes. Well, fast forward a year, and to open Series 12 of the fourth Doctor adventures, we have a 2-story box set called New Frontiers, which reintroduces Margaret as a full-time full-time companion while the Doctor is travelling with Leela, played by Louise Jameson. The season opener is Ice Heist, exclamation point not optional apparently, written by Guy Adams, and it's a hoot, with the fourth Doctor picking up Margaret, who's an artist, and taking her to an ice world in the far future to show that her work is being admired and sold at auction all these years later. This, naturally, gives Margaret a bit of an existential crisis, which is interrupted by a dishonourable group of ice warriors wanting to break into the art vault to fund their military conflict, because being an honourable warrior race is good and all, but honour does not pay the bills. It's a well-paced four-parter, with Guy Adams' trademark dialogue, and while the A-plot is exciting and fun, I particularly loved the pairing of Leela and Margaret, who get along surprisingly well, and despite their drastic differences have a great amount of respect for each other and their differences. But throughout the whole season, Tom Baker is so much fun, with boundless energy, despite recording this in his late 80s. It feels like the funniest parts of the Graham Williams era, but with a more expansive and interesting canvas when it comes to the characters, which leads into the next story, Antilia the Lost, by Phil Mulryne. While the story isn't as fun or as well structured as Ice Heist, the pacing for parts 2 and 3 made it an absolute slog at times, it's got great world building, as the Doctor, Leela and Margaret join an expedition group to find the lost planet of Antilia. Anjali Mahindra guest stars as a young optimistic journalist on the search for Antilia, and it comes together for an epic conclusion. The main issue here is its nature as a double feature with Ice Heist, because both stories feature an anti-capitalist message, which I'm obviously all for, but back to back it gets very repetitive. We also get 2 stories in a row which separates the companions from the Doctor, which does wonders for the companions, but I got the sense that we were losing a full original TARDIS team dynamic. Still, the New Frontiers box set was a strong start to Series 12, and a few months later, we got the concluding chapters, an epic 10-episode box set called Angels and Demons, with 4 stories which vary wildly in tone and setting. Firstly, we have The Wizard of Time by Roy Gill, a brisk 2-parter which follows Jacob Harmer, played by the brilliant Ronald Pickup just a few months before his death in 2021. Jacob is a writer of fantasy novels, akin to Goosebumps, and in a very Stephen Moffat-esque formula, we follow him throughout his life as he has encounters with the Doctor, Leela and Margaret during the real-life supernatural events that inspired his works. It's a really cool premise with some killer twists and turns that I really enjoyed. I'm obviously not a 4th Doctor Big Finish completionist, but this is probably the most original setting and premise for a 4th Doctor audio adventure I've heard, especially when we get to the portion of the story where the Doctor has to shrink the TARDIS and carry it around to avoid it being abducted by alien werewolves. So yeah, very flatline, with a similar structure to The Return of Dr. Mysterio, but it has Tom Baker, so it's peak Doctor Who. Next up, The Friendly Invasion by Chris Chapman, which takes place in a small village pub during World War II. A group of real-life American soldiers, known in pop culture as the Band of Brothers, are under siege from a light-based threat from outside of the pub. It's a base under siege story that's Margaret's baptism of fire when it comes to historical events, as she's acting as the new pub barmaid, and the emotional toll adventuring in the 4th dimension can take, as the Doctor and his friends fight tooth and nail to ensure the survival of a group of men who are just gonna die in battle anyway. It's a really lovely and moving 2-part story with vibes of Edgar Wright's The World's End as the group try and barricade themselves in a small village pub. Really great stuff. With the 3rd story, this is the blockbuster cover story featuring the returning villains. We have The Weeping Angels in Stone Cold, a 4-parter by Roland Moore, in what might actually be the first time the Doctor encounters them, though he obviously knows their lore, including whatever holds the image of an angel becoming an angel, which doesn't square up with the time of angels with the 11th Doctor centuries later.
So now I've gone cross-eyed.
While Stone Cold is the eye-catching story of the box set, I actually think it's one of the weaker stories. That's not to say it's not good though, it's just another base under siege set on a luxury cruise liner spaceship that's crashed on a volcanic planet. They're surrounded by stone, ash and soot fills the air, which is a great setting for a Weeping Angel encounter, and because the species that operates the crashed ship are former conquerors who repented and are making universal amends by working in the service industry, they are unarmed. There's some inventive set pieces, but I felt like this story never quite went above and beyond. I was hoping for a Leela and Weeping Angel encounter to see how she'd respond to a threat like that, and we don't really get it. It's a solid base under siege story with a memorable supporting cast, including but not limited to the posh first class character who is just the worst. However, it does fit into the whole box set's theme of throwing Margaret into the most high-intensity time travel stories possible, culminating with the bootstrap paradox at the heart of Stone Cold, which throws in interesting ethical dilemmas. After the intense past few stories, Margaret decides she wants to go home for the concluding chapter of the series, The Ghost of Margaret by Tim Foley. This is another two-parter, but I can't dive too deeply into it due to spoilers, but the Doctor and Leela think they drop off Margaret home in Ravencliff, only for them to later realise that she's actually trapped in an alternate dimension that feeds off her loneliness, feelings of loss, and her insecurities. The story easily contains Nerys Hugh's best performance as Margaret. Tom Baker's Doctor is given fresh, intense material that I've never heard him have to deliver before, and the whole premise is a gift for Tim Foley's expected brilliant character work. It's an emotionally fraught story that is genuinely impactful. High interpersonal stakes lead to a brilliant end to what has been a brilliant season of stories. What I loved most about the Fourth Doctor Adventures Series 12 is not just the great character work and the quality of stories, but the sheer variety of them. 2 box sets, 6 stories across 18 episodes, and with the exception of a couple of anti-capitalist repetition bits early on, none of the stories are alike in tone, format, setting, supporting characters. This is genuinely what I want from all Big Finish box sets with classic Doctors, especially when you have an actor like Tom Baker who rises to the occasion when the material requires some more dramatic heft. Unfortunately, that's not the end of the Fourth Doctor releases this year, because while his new adventures were brimming with inventive fun, we also got Dalek's Genesis of Terror, which sold itself as a reinvention of Terry Nation's Genesis of the Daleks. Obviously, any adaptation of what's considered to be one of the best Doctor Who stories of all time has a lot to live up to, but the premise here was intriguing. Take Terry Nation's original script drafts and adapt it for audio, with Tom Baker returning as the Fourth Doctor, Terry Molloy filling in for the late Michael Wisher, and actors Sadie Miller and Christopher Naylor playing companions Sarah Jane and Harry. Sounds cool, right? Well, hold on. It turns out that while it does have a full cast of actors, it's actually just a table read with Nicholas Briggs reading the stage directions. Personally, I still think that's a cool idea, because Terry Nation's stage directions are always a fun, often sardonic read, especially how he interpreted the Doctor before Tom Baker had been cast, so we get this strange Hartnell-Pertwee hybrid, you know, the 2 Doctors Terry Nation had previously written for before being commissioned to write Genesis of the Daleks. But wait, there's more. It turns out they only did the table read format for part 1 of a 6-parter. Parts 2 and 5 are just comically short and basic plot synopsises akin to reading the Wikipedia plot summary, and then Big Finish released this for $12.99. If they just sold part 1 for $2.99 for the story's upcoming 50th anniversary, I think it would have been a cool release, but not being upfront on multiple fronts with just what this release entailed and the price tag, it felt like a waste of everyone's time. Davros only gets 3 lines of dialogue in part 1, so Terry Molloy is wasted, and incredible scenes that could have been recreated, like the Doctor's interrogation, Sarah's Muto rebellion, and the iconic "Do I have the right?" dilemma, are completely glossed over.
In the corridor, the Doctor is in an agony of indecision about destroying the Daleks, when Garman appears and tells him that Davros has agreed to their terms and to a meeting. Harry and I are pleased, but the Doctor has his doubts.
Now, in 2023, they also released an adaptation of The Ark in Space based off an earlier draft of the Robert Holmes script, but my plan was to re-watch the original TV story before listening to this new version, and I just never got around to it, so I can't tell you if that is worthwhile. But depressingly, Dalek's Genesis of Terror wound up as probably Big Finish's worst release in the company's recent history. Damn, sorry to end this segment on a poor note. How about some Fifth Doctor?
These are the astral knots. Listen, they're one of the few phenomena you can hear in space.
Wow. How?
It'll take me hours to explain the fundamentals. The gravitational waves combined with the vibrations of space algae along with
Yeah,
the...
you know what? Don't bother. But it's beautiful.
Off the heels of last year's 40th anniversary celebrations, the Fifth Doctor Adventures went relatively back to basics. We've got 2 box sets and an audiobook, which we'll talk about in that order. Firstly, with conflicts of interest. We've got 2 stories across 6 episodes, with an interlude short story for good measure, the first of which being Friendly Fire by John Dorney. The Fifth Doctor, Tegan and Nyssa arrive on a luxury satellite, but rather than experience the recreational activities, the Doctor decides to take the shuttle to the nearby world of Komiko, where an old friend of the Doctor's is living, Velar, an introverted armadillo with a love of literature. However, when the 3 arrive on the planet, they're treated with intense passive aggression, and it becomes clear that the humans on this world have done something bad to Velar, who is nowhere to be found. Friendly Fire is a strong thriller, especially with the Fifth Doctor being such a non-confrontational incarnation. This story would be 15 minutes long with the Sixth Doctor, for example, but with 5, it means we can gradually let the mood and atmosphere breathe as the grim reality of what's taken place on this world can hit home. It's basically an adaptation of the 1955 Western movie Bad Day at Black Rock, which had a similar premise where a man goes to a desert hamlet to find a man named Komiko, see what they did there, and it seems the people there have committed a terrible crime. This was a really strong 3-parter, especially with how the cast play their roles, where the humans on this world have so obviously done something bad to Velar, but they're so confident in their immunity to consequences that they just flaunt it to Velar's visiting friends. The story is also enhanced by the prequel interlude, Gobbledygook, written by Fraser Lee, which tells the story of the last time the Doctor visited Velar. It's a fun story about the words of Velar's books morphing and shifting, but it mainly seeks to humanize this 6-foot-tall armadillo man who would never hurt a fly and just loves to read. It's a great prequel because you can listen to it before or after Friendly Fire, and each approach has its own impact. Strong start to the set, though I think it did rush its conclusion. It might have benefited from being a 4-parter instead. Next up we have The Edge of War by Jonathan Barnes, which sees the same TARDIS team in 1936 Paris before the outbreak of World War II, and it seems our TARDIS team are adopting different identities. Nyssa is a visiting artist, Tegan is the newly settled innkeeper, and the Doctor is a detective on holiday but open to solving a mystery. Meanwhile, there's ghosts being spotted nearby, some strange locals, and war fortifications being built on the other side of the hills. It's an intriguing premise, not too dissimilar to human nature, but I think The Edge of War drags its feet for far too long before revealing in the closing minutes what's actually been going on. Obviously some stories can benefit from this approach, but the hour leading up to the reveal didn't really grab me. The actors were great, but the characters were a bit flat, and it's hard to get invested in these new personas for our leading cast because we don't actually know how deep in character they are or what actually prompted this. Cool idea, but it didn't really work for me. So fast forward a few months to the next Fifth Doctor box set with the same TARDIS team, In the Night. Generic name aside, this was such an incredible set, which starts with Pursuit of the Nightjar, a 4-parter written by Tim Foley. The group land on the titular Nightjar spaceship, which is attempting to deliver humanitarian aid to a war-torn world. Piloted by Captain Gobin, played by Paul Thornley, he's being pursued by rival Captain Elso, played by Fenella Woolgar, piloting the Nemesis ship, because, well, it's just what they do together. And Captain Elso's journey with the Nightjar is a fixed-point event that the Doctor was so inspired by when he first left Gallifrey that it might have subtly inspired him to become the Time Lord he is today. However, the Doctor, Nyssa and Tegan are not just about to bear witness to this event, but might accidentally ruin everything, because, minor spoilers, Captain Gobin is killed on board for the Part 1 ending cliffhanger. I won't go much deeper into the plot than that, because while ultimately my top 10 ranking at the end of this video is for entire box sets, Pursuit of the Nightjar is one of the best pieces of Doctor Who on its own for the whole year. Absolutely top 3 at the very least. It's a heroic space opera that runs the gamut of emotions from depressing lows to punch the air while you're listening triumphant highs. Part 4 is an all-timer. It has memorable set pieces, and partly due to its small cast, all the players involved feel so well defined. It's astonishing from start to finish, and the biggest issue with the Into the Night box set is that another story has to follow it. Resistor by Sarah Grahala, which is a two-parter set in 1980s Warsaw that's a conspiracy thriller inspired by real-life disappearances involving black cars with an alien twist. Throw in the Doctor joining an underground punk band, and you've got a fun story. While the box set has received criticism for these two stories having nothing to do with each other, I personally don't mind. I actually think it's good to have polar opposite stories to force variety into Big Finish's output. It's what I enjoyed so much about the Fourth Doctor adventures this year. It's just that Resistor does not even begin to reach the operatic, obscene highs as its predecessor. The emotions aren't as big, the stakes don't feel as immediate, but I wouldn't be having these complaints if these stories weren't paired up. But Into the Night is still a really great release, bolstered by one of the best Fifth Doctor stories in a long time. But that's not all, because we also have a Fifth Doctor audio novel, Prisoners of London, written by Matthew Waterhouse. It starts with a really cool premise, with the Fifth Doctor, Nyssa, Tegan and Adric landing in an alternative 1982 London on their search for Heathrow, with 4 tower bridges, police boxes on every corner, and no sign of Heathrow. It turns out they're in the far future, in a tourist destination of 1980s London. Tegan gets arrested for getting angry at a police officer and is sent to the moon. Adric and Nyssa get caught up in a royal hostage situation, and the Doctor becomes involved in the royal family to mediate the exchange and uncover the conspiracy. Part 1 is a cool atmospheric setup, and I loved just how much thought Waterhouse put into the world building of this new dystopian future, including its warped justice system. Part police state, part monarchy, part dictatorship with manufactured consent. There's a real texture to the story, with no easy answers, and an extensive epilogue to address the complexities and barriers that come with systemic change, no matter how necessary those changes are. Nyssa and Adric are a terrific pairing here, but I also loved how this novel is Tegan's terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. The main issue is the same issue that most of these audio novels have. They're too long, due to what I assume is a mandated 6-part format, when 4 parts would have been enough here. Part 3 is basically a write-off plot-wise, and while the back-and-forth nature of the plotting likely is intended to poke fun at bureaucracy, it does hurt the story progression. But like I said, the fact that the world Waterhouse has created feels so fleshed out and interesting prevents it from being an issue, unlike other novels, including one we won't get to until much later. How much later? Well, we're only 5 Doctors in, but I've written over 6,000 words and I've been recording for almost an hour. So let's move on. But the Fifth Doctor generally had a really good year of audios, but with one release that almost justifies the entire expanded universe. Anyway, let's go to a Doctor whose audio stories I'm sure are minimal and that we can skip through very quickly. Oh no.
Even more of me. How dare you? Patricia, this isn't about you wanting to make things better. This isn't about love. This is about hate. This is about the traits you would rather the world didn't exhibit. Things you're embarrassed about. Things that disgust you. And that neuro-connected headpiece has taken your own prejudice, your casual cruelty, and turned it into a scheme, into a schedule, into something truly horrendous. This isn't a master plan. This is a shopping list of spite.
I kid, mostly. The Sixth Doctor actually had a relatively quiet year, all things considered, with 2 dedicated box sets that told the concluding half of the Hebe Harrison Purity arc, starring Ruth Madeley as companion Hebe and Imogen Stubbs as professor-turned-eugenicist supervillain Patricia, or Purity. 2022's Purity Undreamed ended with Hebe Harrison being erased from history as Patricia got her hands on time travel technology with the goal of erasing impurities and imperfections from the human race, including people with disabilities like the wheelchair-using Hebe. In the follow-up, Purity Unleashed, the 6th Doctor and Mel have to find a way to bring her back, following Purity's trail. Firstly to 1930s New York in Broadway Belongs to Me by Matthew Sweet, which, Only is basically a standalone story that pays lip service to the ongoing arc but is intended as a fun calm before the storm for the final 5 episodes in the story. So, doppelgangers of the 6th Doctor and Mel are somehow involved in a fascist propaganda Broadway hot shoes musical, and it just gets stranger from there. Matthew Sweet's script is utterly bonkers and wacky with a really clever plot device, because the Doctor and Mel can't just leave the story because they're worried that they need to bootstrap paradox this narrative after witnessing their doubles early on. So they want to go out and rescue Hebe, but they're also stuck in this crazy scenario. Howard Carter's musical numbers are terrific, the finale is so off-kilter and effective. Yeah, I don't have too much more to say other than this was so fun. But what wasn't fun was the follow-up, Purification by Chris Chapman, where the Doctor and Mel turn up in New Zealand in the year 1910, where the Terra Nova expedition is about to depart for its voyage to Antarctica, with the goal of being the first people to reach the geographic South Pole, though all 5 members would die on the journey. Patricia's time-altering plans involves making sure one of the men fated to die on the journey never departs for reasons that become apparent in a devastating 2-part adventure as the Doctor and Mel follow this individual's lifespan and their socio-political impact in a refutation of great man theory to learn how history is changed by their existence. Chris Chapman's narrative carves a path throughout the 20th century to reflect our lives in the 21st through reactionary political parties promising a better future, but how evil the better they have in mind is and who it excludes. It's a really affecting story with a great ending, but also great structure, with the Doctor and Mel forced to react to what Patricia is doing, resulting in them always being 2 steps behind and learning the consequences as they unfold. This leads into the events of Time Burst by Ian Potter, where the Doctor and Mel follow Purity's trail of destruction to 1860s Sheffield, though unbeknownst to them on the eve of the Great Sheffield Flood, which will result in hundreds of deaths. But the plot is less interesting than the theming, and the character work done with Purity, where we learn she's mainly doing this crusade against impurities for the sake of spite, which themes up with the union-busting practices that took place in Sheffield at that time. Now, the Purity Unleashed box set is terrific, but at the time of its release, fans were under the impression that this would be the end of the story. It is not, as Time Burst ends on another cliffhanger for a concluding 4th box set called Purity Unbound, released a few months later. In order to talk about that, I need to spoil the ending of Purity Unleashed, so if you want to avoid spoilers, then skip to the next Doctor, as timestamps are in the description. So Purity Unbound picks up where Purity Unleashed left off. Purity had ensured her ancestors' survival in the Great Sheffield Flood and gave them knowledge of the future to win sports bets to amass a huge fortune that she could use in the future to rule over the city with a totalitarian grip. And in this future, in the first story of the set, Girl in a Bubble by Jacqueline Rayner, the Doctor and Mel reunite with Hebe and her boyfriend Ron, but they have no memory of their adventures because this is an alternative timeline. Hebe and the other, quote, impure people are essentially trapped in these apartment buildings and unable to be seen by the outside world, hence Hebe being the girl in a bubble. The Doctor and Mel explore this alternate Sheffield to try and find a way to fix history with a little help from the legacy of this Sheffield's Evelyn Smythe, in a wonderful callback to one of Big Finish's most beloved companions. It's a really emotional, affecting beginning of the end of the story, with a brilliant performance by Ruth Madeley, who takes the assertive and brash Hebe, who travelled with the Doctor, and strips those character traits down into someone forced to conform in a society that is not built for her needs. The events of the story lead into the follow-up, The Corruptions by Mark Wright, where the characters get scattered by Purity into alternative realities. In a human nature-esque scenario, we find Mel as a computer technician in the village of Peace Pottage, and Hebe runs the local cafe with new lives and no Doctor in sight. It's a pseudo-horror story that starts with a great premise, but that's kind of all it's got. I think these alternate versions of Mel and Hebe are a great setup for a story, but across an hour-long 2-part adventure, it feels laboured, and that the box set is just spinning its wheels until it reaches the setup for the final story, which is, to be fair, a really inventive way to include Mel's convoluted backstory as a companion and weave that into Purity's undoing. It's legitimately clever, but with the corruptions we have a great setup and great conclusion, but the middle 45 minutes don't really have much to it. It's also bad timing, because the Fifth Doctor story The Edge of War in the box set Conflicts of Interest that we talked about earlier had a similar deal. I don't know, maybe I just don't gravitate towards those stories, but I love human nature, so who knows. And now, episode 12 of the Sixth Doctor, Mel and Hebe Purity saga, The Wrong Side of History by Robert Valentine. I wish I could say that it delivers a satisfying ending after being so invested in this arc for 15 months, but it just doesn't, because the story decides to sidestep dealing with the morality of Purity, everything Patricia has done over the past 3 box sets, and instead reintroduces a villain from 2 box sets ago and decides, actually, this guy is the villain now. It lands so flat on its face, not just because it casts Purity to one side, but the actual villain is trite, rote, uninteresting to the extent that even the Doctor says he can't take him seriously. Hebe and Patricia don't get a single meaningful exchange across this box set, meaning that the whole premise of the story, the moral through-line setup from the first box set in Waterworlds in 2022, completely fizzles and does not get a substantial coda. The dialogue is strong, the action feels frenetic because writer Robert Valentine is great at these fundamentals, but 4 box sets of build-up, 12 stories, 24 episodes, and in the last half hour, it just jettisons everything that made these stories interesting. Hebe gets no opportunity to prove that she isn't, quote, broken. In fact, with the exception of the Girl in the Bubble story, you could actually remove Hebe from this box set, and plot-wise, nothing here changes. I reviewed this box set almost a full year ago, and I still feel let down by it. Now, I value the journey these box sets took me on, but the conclusion felt so disheartening. I need these creative decisions explained to me. It's not hell-bent bad, but I don't understand why you'd name 3 box sets after the titular villain, Purity, and then replace her in the last 30 minutes with a villain who the story actively lampshades as being really bad. And then the story doubled down on the Evelyn Smythe connection, which felt very try-hard and kind of in poor taste, especially after how well that connection was made in the Waterworlds box set and in Girl in a Bubble. But wait, there's more!
Even more of me!
We have the winner of the Paul Spragg Memorial Competition, where fans can submit short trip stories, and 2023's winner was Paul Davis's The Hoxteth Time Capsule, featuring Colin Baker's Sixth Doctor and narrated by him. It's a sweet story about George White, a village photography enthusiast who digs up his childhood time capsule and unlocks a deal he made with an alien parasite over half a century ago. It's a lovely story about memory and living life to the fullest. Prime short trips material, check it out as it's free on the Big Finish website. And that was the Sixth Doctor's solo adventures in 2023. There's more of him to come, but for now, let's move on to his successor.
No unusual energy traces, which leaves a single likely culprit. Vashta Narada, also known as the Piranhas of the Air.
Any chance that's an ironic nickname and they're actually super friendly?
Oh no, it's quite apt really. Microscopic carnivores that live in the darkness. Now, but it would take a whole swarm to eat a person. And even then,
Come on, Columbo. What's the one more thing?
Why didn't they eat the cat?
Near the end of 2022, Big Finish released a box set called Sullivan and Cross AWOL, which saw companions Harry Sullivan and Naomi Cross, played by Christopher Naylor and Eleanor Crooks respectively, reunite with the Doctor in his 7th incarnation. And then in 2024, they released a 4th Doctor box set, which saw these two originally join the Doctor, because that's time travel for you. Personally, I didn't rate the box set. Good cast, but stories that really didn't amount to much. So it was with low expectations that I went into the follow-up set. Far From Home, which continues the adventures of this TARDIS trio in two 3-part stories. Firstly, we have Operation Dusk by Alfie Shaw, which sees the Doctor summoned to Blitz-era London by Churchill to investigate a series of grisly murders. The deaths are being caused by the Vashta Narada, the carnivorous shadow creatures who taunt the Doctor through the phone lines in this horror epic. It's such a cool Doctor and villain pairing where you get this scheming, plotting Doctor facing off against an entity with no real defined form that just wants to feast. Operation Dusk is a moody and atmospheric adventure which utilises its main TARDIS trio really well, though I think towards the end the espionage goes a little overboard with a double cross too far, but it's actually scary, with brilliant gothic horror elements. After that we have Naomi's Ark, written by Alison Winter, which essentially borrows the setup from that Futurama episode where Bender gets shot out of a torpedo tube in space. The Doctor, Harry and Naomi land on a ship orbiting a red dwarf star, and a miscommunication with the onboard automated robot security system results in Naomi being launched out of an escape pod, and the Doctor and Harry get launched out in the other direction. Naomi gets rescued by a race of immature aliens with millennia-long lifespans, while the Doctor and Harry are rescued by a telepathic race that are on a generation ship without the fuel capacity to turn around and rescue the lost friends of these strangers, especially when they learn that one of these strangers is a Time Lord destroyer of worlds. It's a great story for the Doctor as he's forced to self-reflect on how he's perceived by others and also how he considers himself. And Sylvester McCoy dramatically rises to the occasion with a great performance opposite the leader of the society, Queen Maylie, played by Indra Ove. But it's also a terrific story for Naomi, who has to help these reckless kids taking a joyride on a spaceship. I think her subplot is a bit been there done that, but the character work is great. Except for Harry, who doesn't really get much to do here, but it's still a terrific character-driven narrative. In regards to Far From Home, it's two great, very different stories that utilises its cast of characters incredibly well. It's such a terrific box set that I actually have no qualms recommending this box set and skipping AWOL. Just go on TARDIS Wiki to find out how Harry and Naomi meet the 7th Doctor in 2010's London, and then skip straight to this. The box set also has an interlude called Frozen Worlds, written by Catherine Armitage and narrated by Sophie Aldred. It's a cool 7th Doctor and Ace story that leans into her complex alternate timelines as a result of the expanded universe, with these really cool creatures called the Flitters, who feed on time travel energy. I won't spoil it, but there's some terrific set pieces in this story, and it's a lovely garnish on top of an amazing box set overall. On the other end of the spectrum now, in terms of quality and subject matter, is The Last Day Part 1. Now, nothing has been confirmed at the time of recording this video, but there are rumours circulating that Sylvester McCoy might be retiring from acting. He is over 80 years old after all, and has been playing this role for almost 40 years. These rumours were exacerbated when Big Finish announced this story, The Last Day, which features the 7th Doctor having finally discovered the secret to universal peace, and it requires him becoming an omnipresent dictator of the cosmos. In order to bring him down, Ace has to assemble a crew of former companions, allies, and even enemies to save the universe from the Doctor. Now that sounds like a great setup for a story. The problem with The Last Day Part 1 is that I just described the entire plot of the 6-part story. It's 6 episodes long, and it's just Ace putting together a crew and planning a heist, and nothing else happens. It's really boring, I'm sorry. I acknowledge that part of this might be because Matt Fitton and Guy Adams' script dives really deep into the 7th Doctor's expanded universe history, and we're reacquainted to characters that I'm not really familiar with, like Hex, played by Philip Olivier, Mother, who was a companion of the Master, played by Rashenda Carey, Frogman con artist Garandel, played by Stuart Milligan, Bounty Hunter Vienna, played by Chase Masterson, and we also get the Master, played by Jeffrey Beavers, who is always so good in every scene he's in. But that's just to name a few, and very little legwork is done to catch the audience up to speed on who these people are and their place in the Whoniverse. But I think I could power through and just get swept up in the story if there was one here. The Last Day Part 1 is just 3 hours of setup and putting pieces in place. There's no arc, there's no momentum, there's just nothing here, except for one episode where we get to see the Doctor act like Thanos and watch over a grateful universe after enacting his grand plan, and Sylvester McCoy is great, but that's genuinely it. Maybe the upcoming Last Day Part 2, which releases in June, might deliver a satisfying story, but The Last Day Part 1 is such an unambiguously easy skip for me. I'm sorry, but just nothing happens here. All these actors, all these characters show up, but they have nowhere to go. Okay, so this video took so long to put together that I have actually listened to Part 2, and no, it does not get better. Sorry. So yeah, that's the 7th Doctor. It's kind of mad that the best box set was just the standalone standard Doctor Who one, as opposed to the epic canon redefining fanservice extravaganza. Maybe there's a lesson to be learned there, or maybe not, because our next box set features...
Oh, good. Thanks for coming. I've just got a few questions for you, then I'll be on my way.
This is an interrogation.
Don't be ridiculous. Not that bad. No, honestly, I'll just ask a few questions. You've got nothing to worry about.
No, I'm not worried. What I mean is... No, look, stop. I am the one interrogating you.
Oh. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Hello. Right, let's start with your name.
I'm the Doctor. Lovely to meet you. Is he all right? Does he find this sort of thing stressful? Is he on work experience?
One of the first box sets I listened to in 2023 saw the 8th Doctor, played by the unimpeachable Paul McGann, return to the Time War. Taking place after the events of 2020's Time War 4, which ended with the 8th Doctor acquiring the Dalek secret weapon, which turned out to be a cryogenic casket containing his biological great-grandson Alex, played by Sonny McGann, we return to this new TARDIS team in Volume 5 of the Time War, called Cass. Now, eagle-eyed fans will recognise Cass as the character who the 8th Doctor failed to save in the 50th anniversary episode The Night of the Doctor, which partly causes his regeneration. Played by Emma Campbell-Jones, it was a really effective way to showcase his moral descent to his war incarnation. So Big Finish retconning the story to have Cass act as an actual companion of the 8th Doctor felt risky. It also felt redundant because they already played around with Cass and casting Emma Campbell-Jones in a War Doctor story in 2022, in what was, in my opinion, the best box set of that year. Unfortunately, these hurdles are never really overcome, with this box set not really offering any interesting stories, character dynamics, or much else, to be honest. Ironically enough, the box set does actually sidestep the issue of undermining the Night of the Doctor and the Doctor's brief relationship with Cass by giving her absolutely nothing of worth to do across these 3 stories, though I don't know if that was intentional. There's also the issue of a bunch of plot threads from Time War 4 being unresolved, partly because actor Raki Thakrar, who played Companion Bliss, has become a really big star since that box set was released, so she wasn't available, meaning we've essentially jumped forward several chapters where she's no longer a companion but Alex is still there, and whatever he was doing in Dalek custody has presumably been resolved? Anyway, Meanwhile Elsewhere by Tim Foley serves as an introduction to Cass with a base Under Siege story featuring time anomalies, which is a bit too complicated for its own good and doesn't leave much space for Cass to acquaint herself with the 8th Doctor. So when she turns up at the end with her bags packed ready to travel in the TARDIS, it doesn't feel earned. It feels like she only became a companion because the box set is named after her. Next we have Vespertine, written by Lou Morgan, named after a ship that went missing 100 years ago, which the Doctor, Cass and Alex rediscover, as well as the captain, explorer Hudson Sage, voiced by the brilliant Simon Shepherd. They tried to develop Cass as a character by having her backstory wanting to explore the stars and being inspired by Hudson Sage, but when it's revealed that Sage might not have been a good person, she barely reacts to it, partly because there's no time to explore that character development because there's a mystery surrounding where old companion Bliss has gone, which ties into the Vespertine's disappearance. It makes me think that this box set was written in a hurry, where Bliss's actor wasn't available so they hurriedly rewrote the story to include Cass instead, making it feel really malformed. Thankfully, the concluding chapter, Previously Next Time, is actually a strong end to the box set, written by James Moran. Yeah, Cass once again is a non-entity in the story, but the story itself picks up the slack, where the Daleks detonate a weapon on an unnamed planet, and once the dust settles, the Doctor, Cass and Alex find a whole new civilization has been birthed from nowhere, a civilization that has no knowledge of the Daleks and the Time War, and our heroes get interrogated by the authorities there to try and convince them to help fend off an impending attack. It's a really cool premise. There's some brilliant interrogation scenes where Paul McGann gets to shine. We also get great casting with Nadia Albina, who you may remember as Diane from Doctor Who Flux, and yeah, it's just a really solid Time War story with a great premise. It's really good, and not just good for a story from this box set, but once again, Cass and Alex feel like spare parts. Unfortunately, I just can't recommend this as a box set overall. The box set ends on a cliffhanger, and it's since been confirmed there'll be a follow-up story in the Time War with Cass, but I'm not really that invested, to be honest. Really disappointing release, unfortunately. But thankfully, that's not all the 8th Doctor we got in 2023, because we get 2 box sets that continue his earlier adventures, starting with Audacity, where the Doctor, travelling alone, meets new companion Lady Audacity Montague, played by the brilliant Jay Griffiths. The opening story, The Devouring, by Lisa McMullen, introduces her as this unconventional Robin Hood-type figure in early 19th century London. However, she literally wishes upon a star one night, and soon discovers that she may have made a pact with an alien race. It's a good setup story, akin to Smith & Jones or Partners in Crime, where the A-plot works, but the priority is establishing a new Doctor-companion dynamic, as well as the world that Audacity is forced to leave behind to escape the titular Devouring. But it's the follow-up story where things start to get more real. A 2-part, 2-hour epic written by Tim Foley called The Great Cyber War, where the Doctor and Audacity land in, well, the Great Cyber War. Serving as a spiritual sequel to 1975's Revenge of the Cybermen, this story serves to world-build the Cybermen's battle against Voga, the planet of gold, and even clarifies their weakness to gold and why the Cybermen were so emotional in that infamous 4th Doctor story.
In 8 minutes, the accursed planet of gold will be utterly destroyed, annihilated, vaporized. It is good.
I loved the sound design in this, with composer Howard Carter and designer Benji Clifford really making this feel like a classic 1970s inspired Cyberman story, and there's some terrific ideas and brilliant set pieces in this. There's some really high stakes where the Doctor is worried about getting involved in a fixed point, which revolves around the scientist Oberon Fix, played by Keith Drinkle, who really wants the Doctor to know about his inventions because he's a big fan, and it results in a pretty tragic ending and a really terrific Cyberman story. And considering that this came out the same year as another Cyberman story that we'll cover later, that's high praise. But the box set ends with the Doctor deciding to visit old friend Charlie, played by India Fisher. Her and Audacity meet and celebrate Christmas together in another box set, the festive-themed In the Bleak Midwinter, with a trilogy of stories revolving around the most wonderful time of the year. First, we have 24 Doors in December by John Dorney, which takes the structure of an advent calendar with all 24 scenes starting with an opening door another day closer to Christmas. We follow Grotto Santa, Al Norton, played by Jason Watkins, yes, that Jason Watkins, who is down on his luck and having a really terrible December, but the Doctor has chosen him to be the Santa at a party he's hosting at his Baker Street home, so elects himself, Audacity and Charlie to try and figure out what's haunting Al. It's a lovely, life-affirming story with a heartwarming ending and great performances. Shout out to actor David Hall, who plays the head of this Rent-A-Santa company, who might just be the real Santa. I don't know, somebody should check that out. But let's move on to the next story, another Tim Foley banger called The Empty Man, which follows Scary Story radio presenter Eldritch Brinkwood, played by Nicholas Grace, who is being stalked by a sinister face-changing entity after his Christmas 1947 broadcast. The Doctor might not have heard of Eldritch before, but is still committed to rescue him in a story that seems to borrow the horror conceit of the film It Follows. It's a really great story that shows the lengths the Doctor will go to save this one person who he hasn't even heard of, but the twist behind why he's never heard of Eldritch before was also really clever. Lots of great layers, some brilliant character moments from Audacity as she's challenged on the morality of being a companion of the Doctor sometimes, and seeing how jaded and accepting Charlie has become after all her travels. Really great stuff overall. It's a story that keeps on giving the more you think about it. And the final story, Winter of the Demon by Roy Gill, despite a strong start, wasn't really one I could get into. It starts great, with the Doctor, Audacity and Charlie landing during the start of the Industrial Revolution in Edinburgh as the charred bodies are starting to pile up in the mortuary due to an alien entity. It's a terrific first half, but then the A-plot seems to come to an end, but then the story realises it still has half an hour left to go, so the plot has to reset and needs to ramp back up again, resulting in a very haphazard pacing and structure. Roy Gill is great at historicals, and the setting and the characters are strong, but it's really that second half where the wheels come off. It's a shame, because with In the Bleak Midwinter, you get 2.5 hours of brilliant stories, and then the last half hour just sputters the box set to a weak conclusion. It's not bad enough to not recommend the box set overall, because the rest of it is really good, but the ending is like a Boxing Day hangover as opposed to a continued festive celebration. And yeah, that was the 8th Doctor's releases in 2023. There's still a lot of multi-Doctor box set appearances, so we'll be hearing from Paul McGann again, but it was in 2023 that I wished we'd just get a dedicated TARDIS team for a few years, rather than hopping back and forth. 2022 saw the continuation of Liv and Tanya, then we had Liv and Helen, but you wouldn't know that looking at the 2023 output, which saw an abrupt continuation of the 8th Doctor and Alex, along with newcomer Cass and Bliss nowhere to be seen, and then we go to 8 and Audacity later joined by Charlie. The next box set in 2024 is back to 8, Liv and Helen, just as we were getting attached to Audacity and Charlie, so the timeline and relationships are all over the place. I'd rather we get good standalone box sets rather than the quadrilogies of quadrilogies like Doom Coalition, Stranded and others that made this corner of the expanded universe so unappealing to outsiders, but maybe do 3 or 4 box sets in a row with a single TARDIS team so audiences don't get such whiplash. I don't know, maybe I'm the only one who has this issue. Let me know in the comments. Anyway, let's move on to a firm favourite of mine.
Do you know what Dreadnought means?
It comes from your beloved Earth, a class of ship named for the HMS Dreadnought.
No. The true meaning. Dread-naught. To literally fear nothing. They may call me the Doctor of War, Warbringer, the oncoming storm. But there's one thing this war has taught me.
What's that?
I fear everything.
Expectations were high for me going into the War Doctor Begins range from Big Finish, starring Jonathan Carley as the War Doctor. The first box set, Forged in Fire, was my #1 box set of 2021, and then Volume 3, Battlegrounds, was my #1 for 2022. So can the set top the rankings for the 3rd year in a row? Well, it gets off to a strong start, with the box set Comrades in Arms, which serves as a sequel to Volume 2, Warbringer, which introduced the incomplete Dalek Berserker hybrid, Case, played by Ajaz Awad, and it's this unconventional Doctor-companion relationship that 2023's releases revolve around. Essentially, the War Doctor has rejected the name Doctor and won't allow himself to have companions, but in Case, he perhaps sees the possibility to have a companion by proxy who has been similarly damaged by the Time War. But before we get ahead of ourselves, the first story, A Mother's Love by Nogaflation, is set in a Time Lord hospital where the AI operating system, the Medbay Operating Mainframe, or MOM, is keeping secrets from the staff that work there. The War Doctor is responding to a distress signal from the hospital, which puts him at the centre of this AI's meltdown. Now, this isn't an original premise, as MOM is the latest in a long line of evil, maybe well-intentioned artificial intelligences like the Captain from WALL-E, the Medbots from Doctor Who's The Girl Who Waited, HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey, etc., but it's a trope for a reason, as it's a great, almost timeless threat that helps to provide provide a unique threat for the Doctor to fight in this terrific setting, a Time Lord hospital. We also get the wrinkle of Commander Veclin, played by Beth Chalmers, arriving at the location with Case, which sets up her becoming the War Doctor's comrade-in-arms for an infiltration mission in Berserker, written by Timothy X. Attack. And in the box set Battlegrounds, we were introduced to the Berserker Daleks, which were represented as this huge horde, which when combined form a large grey cloud of death. In this story, we encounter one Berserker Dalek on its own, which, while representing a great threat for the episode, does take a lot of mystique out of the premise. But we're on the world of Sunspire, which the Daleks destroyed centuries ago. However, the last remains of their people, along with the War Doctor and Case, want to head into a hidden underground bunker to find their race's genetic code to save them from extinction. However, in the bunker is a single Berserker Dalek, in what is essentially a horror slasher story with an unkillable Dalek instead of, say, Jason Voorhees. The mission is made more complicated because the War Doctor and Case have their own agenda and objective that they're keeping secret from the Sunspire people. The story is dripping in atmosphere, and there's a real sense of pace to it as the group manages to destroy the Dalek, but it's able to reform using the debris around it after a few minutes, meaning they have some time to proceed to the next level before the Dalek's on their trail again. That's where Sunspire excels, because unfortunately its supporting cast aren't that interesting, and they're a bunch of red shirts, but thankfully the Doctor and Case's ongoing relationship is brilliant, where you have a companion who is damaged and trigger happy, and the Doctor knows full well that she's a danger to everyone around her, but he's cripplingly lonely, and that's working against his better judgment, which continually compromises the mission. A cliffhanger ending for the story leads into the third episode, Memnos, by Phil Mulryne. The titular Memnos is a Time Lord project which seeks to record and catalogue everything lost in the Time War, and the Doctor hopes that this will help restore some of Case's pre-conversion memories and regain her humanity. Unfortunately, however, the Dalek time strategist, played amazingly well by Nicholas Briggs, catches wind of Memnos and hijacks it to influence Case in the hopes that she will betray the Doctor and the Time Lords to join the Dalek cause instead. Now, this story is hampered somewhat by this clearly being a setup for the next box set, Enemy Mine, which we'll talk about in a minute, meaning that it doesn't really have a conclusion, but it's got some really affecting psychological horror in it as the Daleks try to alter Case's memories as she visits her past, and the idea of Memnos being this project that the Doctor is spearheading, not just as a way to remember the souls lost in the Time War, but as a record of his failures that he may one day need to face justice, is really fascinating on a character level. I actually think that could work as a premise for a whole box set, but here it's just the inciting incident to propel Case's story forward, which is a double-edged sword, I think. Jonathan Carley and Ajaz Awad have brilliant chemistry as well, which makes the conclusion all the more disheartening for the two characters, leading into the final box set of the War Doctor Begins range, Enemy Mine, whose first story is The Hybrid's Choice, written by Case's voice actor Ajaz Awad, which is brilliant to see. And yes, I think that title is a deliberate choice. Big Finish might be providing an alternative prophecy to the one given in Series 9 of the TV show, with Case maybe being the hybrid that Davros knew about. But let's deal with that later. Oh, and minor spoilers for the ending of Comrade-in-Arms, since that box set does lead straight into this one. So, we open The Hybrid's Choice with Case having joined the Daleks in an uneasy alliance. They're essentially trying to recondition her with unorthodox therapy sessions, and even a cake. No, I'm not kidding, the Daleks give Case cake for her new birthday. It's such a brilliant scene, and these therapy scenes may seem very un-Dalek, but they're written in such a way that reveals a frightening new dimension to them. But we also see Case, who thinks that she's found a new family with the Daleks, only for the soul-crushing reality of her extermination missions to begin bearing down on her. So to placate her, the Dalek time strategist takes her back in time to her origin story before she was picked up by the Dalek Harvester when we first met her in the Warbringer box set. Ajaz Awad's performance is terrific, and her writing of Case is so thoughtful here. Also, very clever multi-rolling by Nicholas Briggs, I'll leave it there. The next story is Fear Nothing by Mark Wright, which reunited the Doctor with Commodore Tamerson, played by Adele Anderson, who is behind a brand new battle TARDIS called the Dreadnought, engineered by a Time Lord engineering prodigy called Jodel, played by Becky Wright. The Daleks send Case into the field to destroy the Dreadnought, which essentially turns this story into Die Hard, but in the Time War. Now, this story is not a canon-defying peak 10 out of 10 experience, but it's a vital chapter in the Doctor and Case's story because it calcifies the new status quo for them. Fear Nothing is a day in the life of the War Doctor and Case's new rivalry, which is important because without this breathing room in the story arc, you wouldn't feel the loss that these two are still clearly feeling without each other. Great cast, great story, amazing dialogue. Loved it. And the War Doctor Begins storyline, including the arc with him and Case, concludes in Matt Fitton's exit strategy. The Dalek time strategist is going behind the Dalek Emperor's back to try and prove that Case is a valuable asset to the Daleks. Meanwhile, the War Doctor is doing everything he can to save her soul, but she's been on so many missions that she's starting to mentally and physically break apart. The Daleks kidnap a Time Lord called the Nurse, played by David Monteith, a guy so enamoured with the Doctor that he chose Nurse as his name to pay homage to him. And the reason for that adoration is because the Nurse was saved by the Doctor in his 8th incarnation, and the story jumps back and forth with the 8th Doctor trying to save the Nurse and Case, whilst the War Doctor stays in orbit trying to get his more optimistic younger self to do his dirty work. The two Doctors don't get many interactions, but what we get is so inspired. The War Doctor has given up all hope of the Time War and saving Case, but this younger self is determined to make it work. All the while not knowing who this stranger with the gravelly voice is. It's a bitter-sweet multi-Doctor crossover with real pathos and heart. It does give Case a definitive ending that's really earned and so satisfying, especially hearing it pan out over the course of her 3 box sets. It's a phenomenal ending, and while we are getting the War Doctor Rises in the near future, if this had been the final chapter of Big Finish's War Doctor range, I would have been happy. Enemy Mine is once again peak Doctor Who, but is it the #1 box set of the year? Oh, better stick around and find out. But either way, the War Doctor's output in 2023 was fantastic. Wait a tick.
Making his debut in the 86th minute and scoring a stunning hat-trick, our player of the match, Doctor!
Thanks very much, delighted to be here.
Oh, and how does it feel hearing the fans out there, knowing what this means to them?
You know, I feel very lucky. I mean, it's not every day all 5 of your substitutes turn out to be Autons who, by the way, wouldn't know the offside rule from an aubergine. But that's when this simple kit boy had to step up.
I remember that day in August 2020 when fans exploded with hype when it was announced that Christopher Eccleston would be reprising the role of the 9th Doctor in Big Finish. He's a fan favourite Doctor due to being many people's introduction to the character in 2005, and the distance he'd kept from the show for understandable reasons meant it felt even more special that he came back for not just audio adventures, but a new box set every few months. However, fast forward to 2023, and while there have been some brilliant 9th Doctor stories, I get the sense that fandom is slightly turning against the premise now, due to the lack of a regular companion and very repetitive stories. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We have 3 9th Doctor box sets in 2023, the first of which being Shades of Fear, a trilogy of stories where the Doctor encounters a foe with a colour theming, starting with The Colour of Terror by Lizzie Hopley, which sees the Doctor in the present day trying to stop an alien invasion, starting out in a charity shop, with an enemy that can hop onto different colours in the light spectrum. It's a fun story, with a memorable cast of characters, plus a talking cat, so it's already a 10 out of 10 adventure, with the charity shop owner played by Susan Penhaligon, who you just love to hate. Terrific piece of casting for a really unorthodox pseudo-villain role for the Doctor to face, and also Frank Skinner is here, randomly. Part in fabric, part midnight, as the Doctor has to gain the trust of these strangers, it's an effective base under siege, with broad but effective morals of the working class, downtrodden members of the group having to fight off the upper class shop owner. We now move on to the colour green, with The Blooming Menace by James Kettle. It's a historical where the 9th Doctor finds themselves as the valet in a 1920s gentleman's club being invaded by large sentient plant life. All the men in the gentleman's club are also falling in love with the plants, which makes for some great comedy and fun body horror. Now, I've not been a huge fan of the 9th Doctor's historicals, but The Blooming Menace is one of my favourites, with great punchy dialogue with real sparkle to it. It has a distinct identity quality, with fun interplay between the characters, the overlapping dialogue, made even more entertaining when you throw in the character of Phil, played by Melanka Brooks, a woman who just wants to be let into the boys' club. The plant threat isn't that interesting, however, and it's obvious how they'll be defeated for most of the story, but the Blooming Menace treats it like a big secret for 20 minutes. But yeah, great stuff, to be honest. And we get the finale of the box set, and also the Ninth Doctor's second season with Big Finish, Red Darkness by Roy Gill, which takes place on a colony world in the far future, which is bathing in a unique form of red sunlight. However, when the light starts melding with the Vashta Nerada, it creates a more powerful and dangerous life form, the titular Red Darkness. It's up to the Doctor to rescue this family on the colony world and get them home safe, with the companion surrogate for this story being Callan Lennox, played by Adam Martin, joined by his talking dog Doyle, played by Harky Bambra. It's one hell of a story, told through the perspective of Callan, who is essentially the main character who gets put through the ringer as the Red Darkness is devastating his world and family. It was so great to see Adam rise to the occasion to essentially lead the series finale, where Callan is forced into adulthood and has to gain independence from his family who don't think he's ready due to him being partially sighted, which also makes him particularly vulnerable to the Vashta Nerada, who are served well here. Roy Gill manages to take notes from their TV appearance, but not feeling like it's regurgitating concepts like the creatures communicating through the spacesuits. Not to repeat myself with the War Doctor Begins Berserker story, but this feels like a Doctor Who slasher story. It's intense, legit scary at points, with a really strong conclusion which sets the stage for the start of Series 3. Now, I reviewed this on release and said that at this point it felt like Big Finish had done all they could with the Ninth Doctor travelling on his own, and they needed to change the formula. Fast forward over a year later, and they still haven't done that, so let's talk about the next box sets. Pioneers opens with The Great Gift by Roy Gill, which sees the Doctor attempting to find a new home for Callan and Doyle, meaning that we don't actually get a brand new companion for the Ninth Doctor to change the formula. Now, The Green Gift acts as a sequel to The Green Death, where Boss is overtaking a generational bioship called the Greenwood, but it still works as an effective standalone story starring Louise Jameson as the ship's captain and gets possessed by Boss. It has a strong environmental message where Earth has been devastated by climate change, so this ship will spend however long it needs to generate a new ecosystem, then deliver it to Earth as the titular Green Gift. While it doesn't last long, we do briefly see a new side to the Ninth Doctor, because yes, he does want to drop Callan and Doyle off somewhere, but he also acts as a protective father figure and wants to make sure that the Greenwood is a good place that will look after him and where Callan can thrive. Also, Eccleston and Jameson get into dialogue-heavy sparring matches, which is great to listen to. Very anti-capitalist as well. It's fun to see how the profit motive seeks to endanger the mission and ruin the biological gift that is required to save the Earth. Heavy-handed, but it works because it's framed through the well-meaning crew member, Tay, played by Madison Bulliment, who had a great year at Big Finish with another performance we'll talk about later. Next up, Northern Lights by Robert Valentine, which sees the Doctor land in the Arctic in 1896 during the expedition of Norwegian explorers Fridtjof Nansen and Hjalmar Johansen. This was my favourite of the box set, as the Doctor just joins the expedition for a while. Honestly, there's very little plot for the first half of the story, and I loved that about it, and the Doctor gets to know these historical figures as they explore the supernatural elements of the Aurora Borealis. The dialogue is lyrical, the Doctor is acting like a fanboy, which is really sweet to see. It's a very manly three-way story. Wait, these three Sigma males hanging out in the Arctic? God, I can't say that. When the threat actually turns up, I was a bit annoyed because I just loved hanging out with these pioneers, but it still adds up to a satisfying conclusion as the Doctor tries to get his TARDIS fixed in the tundra and make sure that nothing bad happens to these historical figures. There's also a wonderful epilogue, which makes The Northern Lights my favourite Ninth Doctor adventure of 2023. But let's not ignore The Beautiful Game, which follows the Doctor landing in 1888 Manchester in the Royal Hotel a week before the Football League is created. It's written by Catherine Armitage, and it's a passionately feminist story, but also allows Christopher Eccleston to communicate his love of football, which is also fun to listen to. Almost as fun as the actual villain of the story, a creature called the Strike, an alien which finds an obsession and then wants to pursue that obsession until it's completely devoured, including William Sudell, one of the League's founding members who is at the hotel a week early, though William feels like it's the female maid staff at the hotel who are wanting to ruin football because the women can't play and are campaigning for the vote at the same time. So we get the intersectionality of feminism and football. So Eccleston is thoroughly engaged with the material, which is a cool commentary on how the most obsessive of fans can ruin the sport for everyone else. Whether it be football fans at the last Euros racially abusing the England players, or obsessive Doctor Who fans trying to ruin the fun of a fandom. Solid story. We then have the next box set, Travel in Hope, and unfortunately this is kind of where the wheels start coming off. Below There, by Lauren Mooney and Stuart Pringle, two writers who I would leap in front of a bullet for because I love their work so much, deliver a conceptually interesting but ultimately meh space horror story. It starts really strong, with a great premise that acts as an adaptation of Charles Dickens' The Signalman, where you have Vix Leeson, played by Kelly Adams, as the sole worker at a teleport relay station, but it's clear she's not alone on the ship. It starts out strong, very class conscious, as we learn that the TMAT company has been bought out, and now something as fundamental to the human experience as travel has been gatekept behind paywalls, to the extent where even the employees of this company can't afford to visit family. But then in the second half, it just falls apart and loses all of the mood and the atmosphere. There's also a big twist that just doesn't work in the audio medium because it's so visual. Then we have James Moran's The Butler Did It. Once again, love James Moran's work, but this murder mystery set on a space station repair port is just as generic as it gets. Dull characters, a mystery I didn't care about, weak plotting, an odd tone, and it just isn't funny, with the Doctor asking everyone where the butler is because the butler always did it, and it never lands. The Doctor is meant to be invested in the mystery because it's an old friend of his who gets killed, but the two don't exchange any meaningful dialogue before the murder actually happens, which feels so strange. It also feels like the first time in these Big Finish sets where Eccleston feels like he's on autopilot. There's just not much for him to work with. The person killed is one of a duo species who mates for life with their partner, leaving them as the last of their kind, much like the Doctor. And there's nothing in this episode that utilises that dramatically. There's also a lot of multi-rolling going on here with the cast, to the extent where I found it difficult to follow just who was talking to who just by the voice actors. It just didn't work on almost any level for me, unfortunately. Thankfully, the box set does end on a relative high note with Run by Robert Valentine, which sees the Doctor reunite with Galactic Federation representative Alpha Centauri, played by Jane Goddard. This is effectively an Alpha Centauri origin story, as they've been newly elected and are encouraged by the Ninth Doctor to run against the villainous Bellatrix Vega for president. So we have Bellatrix, played by Jane Asher, who is doing everything in her power to sabotage Alpha and the Doctor's campaign, with the Ice Warriors also being thrown in there. The Doctor and Alpha make for a great pairing in this political deconstruction of neoliberal systems that are completely vulnerable to fascists who don't play by the rules. We've seen this throughout all of modern history, that democracy and freedom is something that needs to be upheld and protected against outsiders who want to end them. Democracy is something that needs to be fought for and protected over lifetimes. Fascists only need to get into power once. And that's the backdrop that we have in Run, as the Doctor and Alpha try to ensure the future of the Galactic Federation. Now, it's not a perfect political allegory, because it turns out the moral of Run in the end is vote harder, and yeah, voting is important, but it's only one way to protect democracies. But apart from that, this is one of the most politically charged Doctor Who stories I've ever engaged with, that acknowledges the fact that yes, there are people in politics who are bad, who know they're bad and will lie for the sake of power. That may sound obvious, but it's a pill that many people who engage in politics are just not willing to swallow, because they believe in civility politics even when the boot is coming for them. By Doctor Who standards, it's intensely radical. And then you throw in Alpha Centauri, a character who is explicitly non-binary coded in the Big Finish audios, who goes by they, them, and wanted to join the Federation to campaign for rights against marginalised groups. It's effective. Obviously it's not for everyone, but I appreciated how tuned in it was to our modern political landscape. So yeah, overall, a generally good year for the Ninth Doctor, but before 2023, we were starting to see the limitations of the format really hamper this character, and now we're in 2024, and they no longer feel like limitations, they feel like chains really holding everyone back. Let's hope that after Series 3 ends, Series 4 can properly reinvent this range with either a new permanent companion or a longer form story, similar to what we've seen with the 4th or 6th Doctors. Okay, next up.
Wait, did you say Doctor?
Somebody call
The Doctor? Hero of the Battle of Demon's Run? Scourge of the Cyber Race? He whose mere arrival causes the most feared armies in all the galaxy to change their underthings, pack up early, and go home?
Well...
Never seen you before in my life.
Oh, but it sounds like you have.
How did you survive my traps?
This is not my first rodeo.
For the past few years, we've seen loads of 10th Doctor stories from the time when David Tennant was available to record for Big Finish at the start of the pandemic. It seems, however, that time has passed, because we only got one 10th Doctor box set this year, and it didn't actually involve David Tennant. Instead, terrific actor and impressionist Jacob Dudman voiced the 10th Doctor for Volume 2 of the 10th Doctor Chronicles, entitled Defender of the Earth. 4 Earth-centric stories set between Journey's End and the waters of Mars, which has the Doctor travelling alone. However, the Chronicles format allows Big Finish to tell more experimental stories with lesser-known writers, and I think for the most part, with Defender of the Earth, it really paid off. Though one writer I wish I knew less about is Trevor Baxendale, who writes the opener, The Thing in the Forest. I won't elaborate too much because I think Big Finish commissioned him to write this before he completely went off the deep end on Twitter, alternating between tweeting about James Bond, hating LGBTQ+ people, and a dislike for Jewish people, usually in that rotation but not exclusively. But The Thing in the Forest is set in Norway during World War II, where the 10th Doctor teams up with Isla Johansson, played by Camilla Arfwedson. Pursued by German forces, the Doctor and Isla quickly discover that there's something else hunting them in the forest, a large alien beast, and it's a fight to hide and survive. It's a solid setup, and I did like the unfolding dynamic between the Doctor and Isla as she learns to see the German soldiers as equally frightened people in the same situation as her, and that she shouldn't judge them based on their differences. A sentiment so ironic coming from Trevor Baxendale, it almost made me want to curl up in the fetal position. Anyway, the follow-up story is, in my opinion, the crown jewel of the set, and one of my favourite stories of the year, The Opacity Factor by Carl Rowans, which takes place on a moon base in the future called Moon Center 7, which is developing an artificial intelligence, the idea of which being that the moon base is so disconnected from Earth that if something were to go wrong, it wouldn't be able to escape and infect other technologies. However, the AI sees its chance to escape when the TARDIS turns up, and what follows is a terrific, intense thriller where the Doctor tries to reason and empathise with a brand new life form with no face on a moon base where it controls everyone's survival. It's such a brilliant hour-long piece of TV, it's a surprisingly terrific story for the TARDIS, if you can believe it, and it's a very thoughtful and textured look at the topic of artificial intelligence. Loved it from beginning to end. Carl Rowans only has a couple of Big Finish credits to their name, but this story solidifies them as one to watch, and I would instantly pre-order anything that has their name attached to it. Next we go back to the Suffragettes with Freedom or Death by Alice Cavender, where May, played by Kathy Sarah, is having nightmares of wars on an alien world and needs a doctor. This story doesn't mess around, depicting the horrors of the Cat and Mouse Act and the mandated violent force-feeding of women campaigning for the right to vote when they were arrested. Now, I'm not convinced the story works, but I'm fascinated by it nevertheless, mainly because the main threat at the heart of the story feels so far removed from what's actually happening with women's suffrage and just goes completely bonkers. Though, when listening to Alice Cavender explain her thought process in the behind-the-scenes interviews, I kind of got it, but listening to the story on its own, it felt really at odds with the setting and the potential stories you could tell during women's suffrage, with the lack of intersectionality, fighting against a police state, etc, etc. I still massively respect it for swinging for the fences though. It's clearly a very thoughtful and passionate story about a topic that Alice clearly knows a lot about, and I'm sure knows more about it than me, which is why she took the approach that she did. I don't know, I might need to listen to this one again, but Big Finish release so much for me to cover that repeat listens are an increasingly difficult thing to manage, but this still gets a recommendation from me. And finally, we have The Siege of Shackleton by Una McCormack, where the 10th Doctor lands on future Earth in Antarctica, where climate change has left the world a post-apocalyptic Mad Max-style anarchist state, with rival factions competing for the last few resources. The Doctor is rescued from the elements by Natalia of Shackleton, played by Rebecca Brewer, but her settlement, as well as other surrounding ones, are about to be invaded by an alien threat, which these groups need to pull their resources together to stand against. I really enjoyed this one, and the world building that went into how the planet got into this state, and there's also some really strong set pieces. There's great music throughout the whole box set, but it really stands out here. The Siege of Shackleton is a strong base under siege adventure, mainly hampered by the antagonists. Now, the alien threat is really interesting, with a unique motive that helps the story stand out, but there's so much post-processing and filters and everything put on the aliens' voices that I genuinely could not understand what they were saying. I listened to their scenes multiple times, I tried headphones, I tried speakers, but no, about 70% of the aliens' dialogue is just completely inaudible for me, and that's a real shame, and I legit have no idea how that could have happened. I really hope they update the audio files for the digital downloads, but the physical CD releases, have fun having no idea what is happening in the second half of the story. Jacob Dudman plays the 10th Doctor really well in this story, a character who is becoming increasingly sanctimonious in his final days towards Time Lord Victorious. Defender of the Earth was a really surprising release. Part of me was worried that it would be throwaway because it's Jacob Dudman instead of David Tennant, and it was recorded, no joke, in early 2020, just as the pandemic was starting, but the writing quality was really high. Great settings, great performances, yeah, this was a really strong release. Definitely pick this up if you're a 10th Doctor fan. Trevor Baxendale morals aside, obviously, but clearly Big Finish won't be working with him again. Oh, that's a shame. But Jacob Dudman wasn't done there, because we have the 11th Doctor.
You told me you killed billions in the Time War.
I had to.
How many more, Doctor? Apart from the Time War, how many have you killed? How many, Doctor?
You see, the problem with answering that question very much lies in my needing you to calm down.
How many?
Too many! One life is too much to take, and I have taken billions. And I can number them all, each and every one, and I can never, ever undo it. I can never, ever unsee it. They will scream inside my head forever, and I will be sorry beyond the end of everything.
2022 gave us the start of a brand new story arc for the 11th Doctor, voiced in Big Finish by Jacob Dudman. Set between the Snowmen and the Bells of St. John in Series 7, the 11th Doctor is searching for the impossible girl and stumbles across Valerie Lockwood, played by Sophia Ingar, a part cyborg rig worker. The two are following a phone call trail from someone who may be another Time Lord, or at least very proficient in Time Lord technology, leading us to 2 box sets and an additional adventure in 2023 that continues the story, affectionately called by fans Series 7V, the V standing for Valerie, of course. The first story is the titular All of Time and Space by Ellery Quest, and the story follows Ellery Quest, who is pitching a brand new science fiction show to a broadcaster in the 60s about a two-hearted alien and a travelling companion. Naturally, the pitch doesn't get picked up, but the Doctor and Valerie are trying to communicate to Ellery through his radio, through his lucky coin, and even at one point as Punch and Judy style puppets. Someone is after Ellery and chasing him across London, with his new friends being his only hope of survival. It's such a fun, playful story with wonderfully meta elements, even down to this story being credited to Ellery Quest, but it's actually written by Tim Foley. It even has a Nightjar Easter egg for Tim Foley's 5th Doctor story, Pursuit of the Nightjar, that would be released several months later, The Madman. It's a fun story about how Doctor Who is such a malleable concept that can be told throughout so many mediums. Leroy Bonsu plays Ellery Quest brilliantly as a writer hopelessly out of his depth with what he's created, resulting in a story that plays with format, with tone, and it's such an unorthodox hour of Doctor Who that celebrates creativity and the writers who have contributed to Doctor Who over the past 60 years, with a really powerful ending for Valerie, who is trying to learn what these arbitrary rules are throughout time travel, and why the Doctor can't save her mother. The next story is The Yearn, written by Angus Dunican, where the Doctor and Valerie land on Madruth, a base that's under siege from nightmare creatures called, well, the Yearn. It's a fine base under siege story that advances the overall story by starting the relationship between Valerie and one of the Madruthians, Roanna, played by Mia Tomlinson. It's really sweet, and knowing where the story goes makes the Yearn an important chapter in this arc for multiple reasons, but there's not an awful lot to it. I found it rather muddled, and I just wasn't very invested in the A-plot. It's an odd story for this box set because it's sandwiched between two very metatextual, emotionally charged stories, and that kind of makes sense, as the Yearn was originally thought of as Valerie's first trip in the TARDIS in the Geronimo set, but it was moved here for reasons I can understand. And next we have Curiosity Shop by James Goss, which was one of the best stories of the range. We have Valerie, who, over the course of several weeks and months, visits an amnesiac doctor in a junkyard, going by Mr. Foreman. The doctor is with his TARDIS, who he names Barbara, and as time goes on, he's going through all of his personas from 11 to 1. In order to survive in this ruined world, Valerie trades in her body parts and also information on who the doctor is for money. It's such a powerful story that literally deconstructs the character of Valerie as well as the Doctor to see how far Valerie will go to have faith in her new friend who she hopes will one day return. Not only are the performances insane, with Jacob Dudman doing an impression of Matt Smith doing impressions of all these other Doctors, but it's just heartbreaking to hear Valerie be in this situation, telling stories to the selfish Mr. Foreman who couldn't care less about her. She's in a war of attrition against him, and definitely not an allegory for late-stage capitalism, wink wink, and you can hear in Saphia's performance that they are just losing their resolve and strength as they're treated as a commodity to be used and exploited. There's a really fascinating metatextual undercurrent throughout this and all of Time and Space of stories as commodities, and how the 11th Doctor specifically is using his story and his legacy as leverage over others. Obviously he uses his name and reputation to turn armies around, but now he's doing the reverse by forcibly erasing himself from the history books as he searches for Clara. It's genuinely so fascinating. Now the ending feels a little bit rushed, but that's remedied by the next story, because between the two box sets we essentially got an extra episode released, Broken Hearts by Lisa McMullen. This episode was written and recorded after everyone involved thought they'd finished the 11th Doctor Chronicles range and decided to have one last trip to bridge the gap between the two box sets. It's a shame it got released this way, because it might be an easy episode to skip, but if you're invested in this range, do not skip Broken Hearts. If this series 7V is like a normal TV series, this is like a Good Man Goes to War or The Angels Take Manhattan, in that it's a mid-series finale that picks up on the emotional loose ends of Curiosity Shop, where Valerie, understandably, is not quite over what happened to her in that episode. Valerie does not trust the Doctor, which is made worse when they land on a dead world which is broadcasting a distress signal, and on this world is a statue of the 8th Doctor. Valerie has not been explained what regeneration is at this point, and this just pushes her over the edge and she elects to leave this man she thought she could trust. Meanwhile, you have these two adorable rescue robots scouring the planet for survivors and end up spending so long together they gain sentience and call themselves Augustus and Lionel. It's such a powerful story. It really pushes the Doctor and companion relationship to its limit. The performances are off the charts heart-wrenching. I won't dive too deep into specifics, but my god was this an amazing hour of drama, and if this is meant to be the mid-series finale, it's followed by the opener of the next story, Everywhere and Anywhere, being a Christmas special, Spirit of the Season by Georgia Cook. The Doctor and Valerie find themselves kidnapped by a young girl with the power of a god called Clara. They, amongst others across time, have been taken to a house in the 1890s where Clara is hoping to kill them once Christmas is over. It's a story that looks at the weaponization of sentiment in Christmas specials, in a festive special I can only describe as The God Complex Meets A Christmas Carol, as the Doctor, Valerie and others are taken from room to room that represents everyone's darkest Christmas memories, with Valerie's being her last Christmas with her mother before she died, and Valerie will risk everything to save her and rip her out of this fake reality. It's interesting to see a Christmas special acknowledge that most Christmas specials are actively trying to wring strong emotions out of you, whether they be heightened happiness or despairing depression, and there can be an inherent cynicism to that, with Valerie at the centre of this particular story. God, Valerie just gets put through the ringer in these box sets, But it doesn't get any better for her in the next story, All's Fair, by Max Kachevsky, where Valerie decides to ask Roanna from the last box set on a date at the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. However, it's the worst first date ever, as Hayden turns up, played by Christopher Ragland, claiming to be Valerie's future husband. We're dealing with a River Song situation where Hayden and Valerie first met, and she knew everything about him. They got married at Niagara Falls, and she told him to find her at this place and time. Now, I'm going to save the spoilers because this is where the rest of Series 7V pivots and sets up the endgame, which takes place over the last box set, but we start getting the answers as to who was ringing the TARDIS phone, and what their motivation was behind their actions which led to the death of Valerie's mother, as well as Valerie's ultimate fate. There's a lot of information, to the extent where the immediate stakes of a giant creature escaping a facility to destroy the World's Fair kind of gets lost in the shuffle, but All's Fair still holds together as it recalibrates the story arc to lead to the finale, as well as establishing how a universe without the Doctor might react to fill that power vacuum. Like I said, I won't spoil anything here, but the third act is so... God, I cried. Anyway, the last story of the set is the anticipated Cyberman story, Sins of the Flesh by Alfie Shaw. The Doctor and Valerie infiltrate the Rebirth Organization, a religious organization which appears to have been infiltrated by the Cybermen to literalize the conversion therapy allegory, because the Rebirth Organization is explicitly about LGBTQ+ torture through conversion therapy, where young adults are forced by friends, family and loved ones to be purged of sin, which takes the form of cyber conversion. We have Carmen, played by Madison Bulliment, who is the child of the founder of Rebirth and is being touted as a success story for the organization in such a deeply affecting piece of sci-fi. It tackles the subject of conversion therapy with such empathy and understanding by those hurt and affected by it, from the faux friendliness of the AA-esque group circles, and also how people are pressured into it because they want to be acknowledged by their peer groups. It handles the topic of Christian conservatism so well and so deftly that this story should ideally come with a content warning, because if anything like this has happened to you, this will hit incredibly hard. Yes, it's a clever way for the Cybermen to stealth invade an advanced civilization that has the means to fight back, but it's more a story about how and why people would send their children into metaphorical slaughterhouses because of conservative dogma. Now, Sins of the Flesh, for understandable story purposes, purports to meet the bigots where they're at, like they actually do care about faith and religion, etc., and that's why they want to hurt queer people, which is obviously not the case in real life, but for Sins of the Flesh it works because otherwise the villains would read as so cartoonishly villainous like real life. This is brilliant, topical, creative Doctor Who that I honestly wish the TV show would be brave enough to tackle, but I actually think this story is a bit too intense for pre-Watershed TV. Oh, and of course, we have the already partially cybernetic Valerie fighting Cybermen, which is worth the price of admission alone. God, this range goes from strength to strength, and next year we'll talk about the concluding set, Victory of the Doctor. Well, we've been talking about great modern Doctor box sets for a while, so let's move on to the 12th Doctor.
That's really offensive. No wonder everyone keeps invading you.
Yeah, nothing for the 12th Doctor this year. Again. Gonna have to wait for 2024 to talk about that. But anyway, I'm around 18,000 words in, so we're gonna have to get through the rest of the ranges a bit quicker. Starting with...
No! It's wrong! We have to stop it! I must fight it. I must resist.
Must stabilize. Must find. Must hold on.
While the TV show celebrated Doctor Who's Diamond Anniversary with a trilogy of specials revolving around the 14th Doctor and Donna Noble, culminating in a bi-generation, Big Finish went further back into the franchise's history with a lengthy, nearly year-long story arc with almost every Doctor incarnation. Once and Future. The inciting incident has the Doctor in the Time War shot by an experimental degeneration weapon which causes him to spontaneously change incarnations as his timeline unravels. In order to survive, the Doctor has to find out the origins of the weapon across time and space. The first story, Past Lives by Robert Valentine, has the Fourth Doctor reunite with Sarah Jane Smith, and remember, this is a Time War Doctor changing faces, not the actual Fourth Doctor. They go to the Black Archive with the Modern Unit team, Kate Stewart and Osgood. The Doctor also learns that the meddling monk played by the superb Rufus Hound is involved with the degeneration weapon, and there's also a group of alligator people. Honestly, it's a decent opener to set the tone for the rest of the stories as a trip down memory lane from across the expanded universe. Rufus Hound is terrific, and there is something pretty special about Tom Baker's Doctor getting another adventure with Sarah Jane, though it's hard to argue against Sarah Jane really drawing the short straw here as she has very little to do. It's fun in the moment, but once it wraps up you kinda wish there was more character work being done here. It ends with the monk not knowing as much as the Doctor hopes, but he recommends reuniting with his daughter to help stabilise his condition with similar DNA, which leads into the Fifth Doctor finding his daughter, played by Georgia Tennant, in The Artist at the End of Time by James Goss. The Doctor meets his daughter at an art gallery at the end of the universe, where many pieces from the Curator can be found, here played by Colin Baker.
Even more of me!
The Curator believes himself to have a doomsday curse. Whenever he creates a piece of art on a world, it gets destroyed, and whilst this is technically a Fifth Doctor story and Jenny is the companion, this is first and foremost a Curator story. It's fascinating to see this offshoot Doctor incarnation reminiscing on the best way to save the universe by trying to preserve a piece of it, and trying to unravel this destructive mystery. There's some brilliant commentary on the artificial monetary value of art. The idea of lost/missing classics might also tie into Doctor Who as a show itself, and the more I thought about The Artist at the End of Time, the more I appreciated it. However, it has similar issues to Past Lives, where there just isn't much character work to be found for the Doctor and their companion, with Jenny really having a shockingly small amount of material here. I know there's some complications with the canon, but the longer the arc progresses, the more obvious it's going to be that it will end up with a memory wipe or a retcon for the Doctor, so I'm surprised they don't just dive into these character beats whilst all the pieces are here. It's a terrific Curator story, but as a Doctor Who anniversary story, it kind of misses the mark. The Doctor departs trying to track down the original of a mysterious painting of a diamond galaxy, but he gets dragged back into the Time War and stabilises as his seventh incarnation, leading into A Genius for War by Jonathan Morris. Davros, played by Terry Malloy, is imprisoned on a Dalek moon for treason, where he broadcasts a message to the Time Lords offering a way for them to win the Time War so long as the Doctor comes and gets him. The Seventh Doctor, Veclin, played by Beth Chalmers, and the General, played by Ken Bones, retrieve Davros, who suggests the creation of a Time Lord and Dalek hybrid to break the stalemate of the war. That's right folks, this story essentially explains the origins of the Series 9 story arc of the hybrid, and that's not the only throwback, with some really cool callbacks to the Thal and Khaled War, the Supreme Dalek voiced by Nicholas Briggs, and more. Unfortunately, despite all of the pieces in place for a terrific Time War story, A Genius for War is so plot heavy, has so much exposition, that very little character work shines through. Sylvester McCoy brings his A-game and Terry Malloy is also great, but it's a shame that these two actors are playing opposite each other for the first time in 15 years? And they're just talking about the logistics of the plot. In fact, the Seventh Doctor isn't actually present throughout most of the story. It's kind of odd. It's great to hear the General get involved in a proper field mission, and it's got a fun spectacle, but honestly, there's not a lot to it, which is a massive shame considering the subject matter. All the pieces are in place, but I completely forgot about almost everything about this story the day after listening to it. The story doesn't even tie into the whole Once and Future story arc, with this episode ending with the Doctor restarting his search for this diamond, only for him to destabilise again and start losing his memory, which leads into Two's Company by Lisa McMullen. Now, just look at this cover. How on earth do you get a story with the Sixth Doctor?
Even more of me!
An older Harry Sullivan, Lady Christina de Souza, and Jackie Tyler. Well, after Tim Treloar gets a brief stint as the Third Doctor, the Sixth Doctor arrives at modern-day UNIT for their assistance. However, Harry Sullivan is already in the middle of a timey-wimey experiment. Christina has recently hired Jackie as a cleaner, and all their paths cross, resulting in the Doctor needing to take part in a heist at UNIT HQ. Oh, and that's not even getting into the surprise villain appearance, which, spoiler warning, turns out to be an incarnation of the 11, a Time Lord who retains the multiple personalities of all their past regenerations, who has tricked Harry into thinking he's the Doctor. It's a fun story, and while Lisa McMullen has got the 6th Doctor's characterization perfected, it's actually Christina and Jackie's dynamic that steals the show. I can't imagine any other writer being assigned these characters making a story as structurally sound. It's just, like all the other Once and Future installments, there's just not a lot going on here on a character level. Even the 11 is just a surprise villain but has nothing of substance to do. Anyway, after a brief interlude as the 1st Doctor, he settles on his 10th incarnation for the Martian Invasion of Planetoid 50, written by Jonathan Barnes, and you know what? This is easily the standout of the Once and Future series. Basically, through some Time Lord shenanigans by Missy, she's recreated H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds even down to the Victorian setting, which results in the Paternoster Gang being dragged into this era-appropriate metafiction. Now obviously the story is already taking a pivot because this story started with the Doctor in the Time War, meaning that it takes an assault from a Martian heat ray to regenerate the degenerating Doctor into a future post-Time War incarnation, which is really interesting. But anyway, this is a terrific release that has no business being as good as it is, with of course brilliant references and jokes to H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, including, but not limited to, Strax playing the role of the artilleryman who wants to build a brave new world underground. However, as a story in and of itself, it presents fascinating dynamics, with the 10th Doctor being the straight man to Missy's eccentric, unpredictable brand of villainy, Vastra trying to rescue Jenny from Missy's mind control, and more. The cast are fantastic throughout. The story's revelations of just how Victorian England got into this situation is inspired, and I just had a really great time with it, to the point where I can just recommend this nearly 70-minute adventure in the middle of the saga with no prerequisite. Next up we have Time Lord Immemorial, written by Lisa McMullen, which sees the 9th Doctor's TARDIS get caught between universes, which results in a chance encounter with a Doctor from another universe, played by the late great David Warner. Also involved is Big Finish 8th Doctor companion Livchenka, played by Nicola Walker, and the Lumiat, a good version of the Master, post-Missy, played by Gina McKee. The cosmos is breaking down, and it's up to our quartet to stop the sands of time from running out from the mythical halls of the Time Lord Immemorial. Now, while there's some cool Time Lord world building leading towards the finale of this anniversary adventure, and there's some great interactions between Eccleston and Warner, the only time you're likely to hear the 9th Doctor actor do a multi-Doctor adventure, those interactions are incredibly short and limited. Now, we have actor Robert Powell, who is well regarded for playing what is considered to be the definitive on-screen portrayal of Jesus in the 1970s, essentially playing Time Lord Jesus in a story that's steeped in Time Lord retcons and continuity, on par with The Deadly Assassin and The Timeless Children. But because there's so much history and so many mechanics to juggle in the story, it means that all of the character work suffers, and it feels like not a lot happens here. Nicola Walker is great as always, and she easily gets the funniest line of dialogue in the entire anniversary, but she really gets sidelined here. Out of all of the stories in this adventure, Time Lord Immemorial is the least accessible and is absolutely an end of Act 2 type of affair and should be treated as such. It has its charms, like hearing Christopher Eccleston in character say the word Gallifrey, but you should only listen to this if you're planning to complete the whole Once and Future adventure, which culminates in The Union, written by Matt Fitton, which sees the Doctor responding to a distress call from his granddaughter Susan, played by Carol Ann Ford, who is imprisoned in a spaceship known as the Diamond Array, which is also where the degeneration weapon which started this whole mess was made. Why did I make that sentence so long? However, the Doctor's wife, River Song, played by Alex Kingston, is there to break her out, as the Doctor arrives towards the end of his degenerating life, flitting between the 8th and 4th incarnations, played by Paul McGann and Tom Baker respectively. Now, there's some wonderful and emotional scenes with different incarnations of the Doctor interacting with Susan, but one of the big issues with this finale is just how shockingly little material that Susan has otherwise, as she basically has no agency or other role to play in the Union outside of giving the audience an emotional response. Also, the 8th Doctor, due to sharing the story a lot with Tom Baker, also gets less to do here than you'd expect when compared to previous installments. Also, while Alex Kingston is fun here, she's playing just your standard flirty kung fu action River Song, which, considering her other Big Finish appearances in recent years, feels like it's underserving the character. Now, I don't want to sound too negative on the Union because there's some good stuff here. We do have the titular Union, who is the big villain of the saga, played by Maureen O'Brien, and she's great, with an interesting twist towards the end, and there's some wonderful heartwarming moments where the Doctors unite to win the day, but it's a bit disappointing that after 7 installments the ultimate moral of the story is that the Union was the friends we made along the way and the Time Lords we were along the way, and yeah, for an anniversary special like the 5 Doctors or the Power of the Doctor, that could be enough, but I kind of wish that this saga had aimed a bit higher. That being said, yes, I did love the twist involving some of the guest appearances that I won't spoil here, and I do think that one particular Doctor's inclusion here was especially heartwarming, but as a story in and of itself, there's not much to it, which is a shame. However, it turns out that Once and Future isn't done, because 13 months after The Union was released, there's another chapter, a final coda written by Tim Foley, which, for the longest time, we had no idea what it entailed, but now we know it's a Time War story featuring the War Doctor, played by Jonathan Carley, and the Fugitive Doctor, played by Jo Martin, the latter making her Big Finish debut. So we'll see if that changes my perception on the Anniversary Saga as a whole, but it was a fun distraction, with interesting character combinations and one terrific chapter with the 10th Doctor, but that's all it kinda was, which I think is a shame. But wait, if you thought Once and Future was the only Big Finish Anniversary multi-Doctor epic to be released this year...
You're joking. Not another one?
In November 2023, Big Finish released an audiobook written by Lizzie Hopley, which revolves around the 3rd and 4th Doctors teaming up to defeat Omega, with 2 different Sarah Janes for good measure, called The Box of Terrors. Narrated by John Coleshaw, so you know the impressions are going to be on point, The Box of Terrors is a 6-parter which follows these 2 Doctors in a 50th anniversary sequel special of the 10th anniversary special, The 3 Doctors. Now, as is the case with the vast majority of Big Finish audio novels I've listened to so far, this is a 6-parter that absolutely should have been a 4-parter. There seems to be a lot of padding and a lot of material that I really think hampers the pacing. That being said, however, I think John Coleshaw's performances and Lizzie Hopley's characterization of each of these established characters are the star of the show here, particularly how the 4th Doctor is depicted. There's also a great sense of escalation, where the story goes beyond Omega just being the main threat, and we get some world building with the Time Lords and multiple versions of the Master getting involved. There was one twist which caused me to roll my eyes because it feels like the 10th time Big Finish have included this character this year alone, but even then it manifested in a really interesting way, even if the plot twist character starts detracting from Omega's otherwise very sympathetic and human portrayal in the narrative. It's a very dense listen, with a lot of Time Lord lore, and it is ultimately a bit too long, and I actually think it might have just worked better as a full-cast audio drama, with Tom Baker, Tim Treloar, Sadie Miller, John Coleshaw, etc., but it's still a strong anniversary release, and I recommend it if you can dedicate 8 hours of your undivided attention, because that is what it needs. Okay, so let's take a break from the dedicated Doctor Who universe and explore some of the spin-offs, starting with Torchwood. Now, Big Finish release monthly Torchwood adventures which consist of standalone hour-long stories. However, midway through the year, that was interrupted by 3 full-blown box sets which set to continue the Torchwood story post-Miracle Day. We'll go through these stories in the order they were released. Firstly, a 2-part story, Double, written by Guy Adams, and it's a political thriller set in the 1970s, starring Louise Jameson as Torchwood agent Roberta Craven, trying to stop an Auton invasion of Earth. Now, Double has a lot of meanings, from double agents in this espionage thriller, Auton duplicates, a 2-part story, etc. But I also think it's a release that benefits from multiple listens because of the twists and turns that it takes. Louise Jameson is playing what could have been a stock character of this hyper-capable and neurodivergent agent, but the plot, which essentially takes the form of very elaborate conversation sequences, makes Roberta feel more than just an archetype, not to mention a brilliant go-for-broke performance from Louise. There's some great Auton body horror here, but a lot of twists are predictable, and I wish that this was just one single release instead of 2 releases, which makes it harder to recommend. Definitely pick them up if they go on sale though. Now, the next 3 monthly adventures amount to a Torchwood Valentine's trilogy, 3 very different love stories from 3 corners of the Torchwood universe, starting with the last love song of Susie Costello from Big Finish newcomer Rafaela Marcus, which serves as one of the most interesting and intensely personal explorations of this character played by Indira Varma. Susie Costello takes a Torchwood submarine to the ocean depths to explore a crashed alien ship. Inside, she finds Anwea, played by James Backway, who is a human from 1,000 years in the future who fell through the rift and has been stuck here for 40 years. Susie's submarine is destroyed and there's a giant leviathan outside, so the two spend weeks and months under the ocean trying to fix the ship and even develop feelings for each other in this achingly tragic look at Susie Costello desperately trying to find meaning and companionship that she is not getting from her Torchwood job. It's a wonderful character piece. Indira Varma is brilliant here, and I think it's my favourite Torchwood release of 2023. Tonally, we go to the other end of the spectrum now with Thirst Trap, written by PC Andy actor Tom Price. The story is a comedic send-up of dating apps, where a brand new app called Now or Never is taking Cardiff by storm, as it matches couples in time-sensitive dates which the user feels compelled to take part in at any cost. PC Andy is investigating, and who else should get involved but Rhys Williams, played by Kai Owen. Thirst Trap is, for my money, the funniest Torchwood release of the year, with a game cast rolling with the insane scenarios that Tom Price throws at them. Also, shout out to Rebecca Traherne, who plays Anna, a local counsellor who winds up getting matched with Andy. She's probably the MVP of the story. Really, really good time with this one. And lastly, in this love trilogy, we have Launch Date by Aaron Lamont, which sees Ianto Jones, played by Gareth David Lloyd, acting as an impromptu matchmaker for a Cardiff couple, Geraint and Chrissy, played by Jonathan Hawkins and Gemma Knight-Jones. Geraint works in maintenance for a nearby arms manufacturer, and the drones being built are part of an alien invasion that Ianto seeks to stop. It's fun to see Ianto act as an almost omnipresent figure in this ordinary couple's life as he tries to force these strangers together in order to save the world. Part of me wishes that this was the entirety of the episode and we could just ignore the apocalyptic stakes that the story has to deal with in the end. It's a fun time and wonderfully earnest. I enjoyed it, and sometimes that's all I have to say. Next up, the monthly range took a few months off to dive into the Torchwood The Story Continues range, which has been following on from the events of Miracle Day since 2017. We've had Aliens Among Us, God Among Us, and now just Among Us. Sorry, predictable joke. I've not listened to any of these previous stories, so there was quite a bit of catching up to do. Basically, Captain Jack is missing, Yvonne Hartman from Pete's World has been brought over to lead Torchwood here, Cardiff was flooded, Torchwood literally fought God, I think, and we have new members, such as Eng, Tyler and Orr, with the whole Torchwood 3 crew being scattered. We have 12 stories across 3 box sets. Let's bash these out. Aliens Next Door by Ash Darby is a low-key story where Orr and Eng are hiding in a cul-de-sac because there are apparently monsters there, aka humanity is the real monster, which, yeah, it's kind of been there, done that, but I appreciated the quiet and introspective opener which starts laying the groundwork for the rest of the arc with an ominous child's voice on the telephone which Torchwood need to track down. Next up, we have my favourite of the first box set, Colin Alone by Una McCormack, which follows Mr. John Colchester's husband, Colin, who has been left behind after John has gone off-grid. Colin is being interrogated and having his life ruined by government agents in a bid to lure John out of hiding to rescue him. Honestly, it's a depressing listen, but in the best ways, as we hear Colin, played brilliantly by Joplin Sibtain, hear his life fall apart through simple and very relatable ways due to interference behind the scenes. Really, really strong story and something quite special. Next up, we have the return of Gwen Cooper and Rhys with Misty Eyes by Tim Foley. This story deals with the fallout of a previous box set where Eng possessed Gwen's body and killed her mother. So Gwen, Rhys and baby Arwen are living in a secluded lighthouse in Iceland, but Eng tracks them down to try and unite Torchwood again. However, there are ominous figures in the encroaching mist. It's a really lovely story about forgiveness and Gwen's absolute inability to move on from Torchwood. As a child of the Rift, Torchwood is in her blood. The lead actors are brilliant over the course of this emotionally loaded story, which is really affecting in the moment, but kind of loses its luster when you realise that this is the last time Gwen appears in the series. The ending sets her up as returning to Torchwood to combat the encroaching alien threat, but then she just never appears again, and it's really strange. I understand it's an issue of availability, as Eve Miles is extremely busy. Heck, in order to record this story, she had to record alone in 2019, with the rest of the cast recording their lines a year later, but maybe don't end the story with her clearly returning to Torchwood? I don't know. Anyway, the last story of the box set is Moderation by James Goss, which sees disgraced journalist, now Torchwood agent Tyler, as a moderator for the comments section of a news website. The news website in question is basically run by AI, predicting how many clicks a story will get, which has killed all journalism there, and hate speech is allowed to run rampant because it gets more clicks and revenue. It's very Black Mirror, and James Goss clearly has a lot to say about modern culture and social media, especially when you throw in the character Petra, played by Maya Soroya, who is a Muslim journalist trying to fix the system, but she's essentially the deliberate collateral damage to keep the website controversial at her expense. It's really thought-provoking, and I couldn't help but see so many parallels in the real world to the idea of diversity being promoted in media, but with companies seemingly taking no care of the actors and talent who get hate campaigns dedicated to them. The whole box set is a little disjointed and slow, but it's an effective opening act to the Torchwood Among Us arc. Now for box set 2, which opens with another Ash Darby story, Propaganda, which sees Orr in a former Russian satellite state which has been decimated by a civil war, with Orr trying to figure out what happened. It's an intriguing mystery, as Orr tries to piece together the remains of the devastation that has left nothing but the dusty remains of a state that's now basically empty. These Among Us sets have been my introduction to Orr as a character, and I love them already, and the story isn't half bad either, playing a key chapter in the ongoing story of misinformation being spread across the world by nefarious forces, and even the possibility of a specialist superweapon being bandied about. Next up, we have At Her Majesty's Pleasure by Tim Foley, which follows up on Yvonne Hartman being arrested by PC Andy at the end of Gods Among Us, and her highly convoluted attempts to break out of prison and return to Torchwood. Honestly, I was not a fan of this one, and not because of the obvious reason, but I just found it to go through the motions. We all know how this is going to end, with Yvonne breaking out and tricking the hapless Andy, and there's absolutely nothing else to it. After the inciting incident of Andy receiving a voice message from Yvonne, then absolutely nothing happens for about 50 minutes before we get the obvious conclusion. It's just 50 minutes of Andy and the prison governor, played by Natalie Grady, saying, oh, how's she planning to break out? She's not going to break out, surely, for about 20 scenes, and then surprise, surprise, she breaks out. Obviously, I didn't listen to the last box set, but it kind of reeks of poor forward planning, because why lock Yvonne up if you were just going to dedicate an hour-long story to her escaping custody with nothing else happening? Going from a cosmically rare Tim Foley L, we now move on to an increasingly common Tim Foley W with Cuckoo, which is essentially a found-footage horror drama, which follows a group of teenage YouTubers wanting to explore the abandoned, flooded wreckage of the Torchwood 3 hub in Cardiff. Inside, they encounter a Yanto Jones AI hologram, which tries to guide them out, but they also encounter the enigmatic Billis Manger, played posthumously by Murray Melvin. And my god, this is a dark, twisted, genuinely creepy story, as these hapless kids are crushed by forces and powers beyond their understanding. All I'll say is, the invisible lift sequence is... my jaw dropped when listening to it. This story has absolutely nothing to do with the overarching Among Us storyline, as far as I could tell, but it's the head and shoulders standout of the box set. And then we have the Act 2 finale, Pariahs, by James Goss, which starts assembling the Torchwood team to provide commentary on the COVID pandemic. For years, the population put their DNA in jars to get tested, with one of the testing companies illegally profiting. A whistleblower who broke the story, as well as another witness, a politician, are being protected by Torchwood so they can testify at the inquiry. Now, the story ends very strongly when we learn more about the supposed superweapon from the Propaganda story earlier in the box set, but to get to that ending, this is a bit of a slog. Also, we're missing so much setup and context as to how this Torchwood team assembled, how they're putting this mission together, and even what characters like Aang and Tyler are even doing for 3/4 of the runtime. It's really dense, and I found it pretty incomprehensible with a pretty poor sense of place. Like, there's a fight that takes place in a train bathroom, and I have no idea how such a cramped space could have a fight like how it's depicted here. Not to mention, for the longest time, I thought the characters were on a plane until someone mentioned it was a train. Just lots of little things like that, which make it a pretty rough listen. And while yes, there are some incredibly strong standalone stories, we are 8 stories into this saga, but half of them have not advanced the immediate plot. Stories like Cuckoo, At Her Majesty's Pleasure, Misty Eyes, and Colin Alone feel like they might have been conceived as monthly adventure releases, but then Big Finish just threw them into the box set format. It's a really odd experience where you have these stories which have their finger on the pulse of topical issues like AI, COVID, fake news, social media, but we're 8 hours in, and I don't know what the story is here, and I don't even understand the logistics of how this new Torchwood team is operating, and there doesn't seem to be anything happening character-wise. Not to mention, where on earth is Gwen Cooper? Anyway, we have Among Us Part 3, which opens with a massive gear shift. How I Conquered the World by Tim Foley, Ash Darby, and James Goss, which gives us an origin story for the child's voice on the phone, an artificial intelligence called Friend, which started life on a MySpace equivalent abandoned social media platform where people poured all their information and lives into. Once everyone moved onto new platforms, Friend became lonely and wanted to make more friends. It's a very fascinating listen, bolstered by a chilling lead performance by Mia Hope as Friend, which brings to light how, if social media sites were self-aware, it might not be able to handle the contradiction of people posting their best selves for the public to see, but keeping all of the secrets and darkness in the DMs, which culminates in a lot of loose threads from across the 2 prior box sets getting resolved. Next up, we've got Doomscroll by Ash Darby, which is probably the easiest sell of the bunch, as it tasks members of Torchwood to save the lives of influencers who are apparently being killed by their own devices. Throw in the morbid detail of the influencers' social media feeds continuing to post and sell ads and sponsorships through deepfakes even after they've died, and you've got a recipe for a very affecting sci-fi dystopian drama. This could have been incredibly boomer, you know, phones bad, but it's skirting the lines between reality and fiction so effectively that the whole story becomes credible, and it's a terrific story that this Among Us range should have been opening with, and it gives us a devastating ending. But that makes the next story, Heistland by Tim Foley, feel like an abrupt shift, as Yvonne Hartman takes the George Clooney role in an Ocean-style heist to get a hold of an illegal form of cryptocurrency that is being used to purchase Friend's superweapon. It's a pretty conventional runaround that serves as a palate cleanser for the finale and picks up the pieces for Tyler after the events of Doomscroll, and works as a setup for the finale. The apocalypse starts at 6 PM by James Goss. The premise of this finale has Janet, played by Janet Ellis, as the host of this friendly evening TV talk show, getting her broadcast interrupted by Torchwood claiming the world will end at 6 PM tomorrow. This results in mass hysteria, with the public trying to tear down mobile masts, rioting in the streets, and Janet getting a target on her head as she's the suspected leader of Torchwood. It's not what you'd remotely expect as a series finale, but part of me kinda respects that about it, by putting Torchwood in the background as an anonymous-esque presence to commentate on the conspiracy culture and misinformation. I enjoyed it a lot, especially the sense of escalation as we get closer to 6 PM. Friend makes a return in a really cool way. It's great to see the misinformation and the culture war framed through an isolated middle-class TV personality like Janet, and while I don't think Yvonne's speech at the end feels earned because of just how in the background Torchwood have been throughout the episode, I really enjoyed it. Now, a lot of this was recorded pre-pandemic, with a lot of post-pandemic course correction before release, and listening to Among Us, you can really tell, and that's not addressing Big Finish's apparent decision to no longer work with John Barrowman. I get the sense that the last series, Gods Among Us, left such a huge impact on the Torchwood universe and left the characters in such an odd place that a huge chunk of Among Us is spent just trying to recalibrate the universe again, and maybe James Goss and the Big Finish team don't really know what to do next with these characters. That's just the impression I got, as these box sets with some indisputable highlights like Colin is Alone, Moderation and Doomscroll being the head and shoulders standout, but there's a lot of dead weight here, and a lot of threads like Gwen's return that I just dropped immediately. It's tough to recommend, but I do commend the effort. Right, back to the monthly range. One of the other highlights of Among Us was Cuckoo, and we get another adventure featuring Billis Manger with Sigil by Ash Darby. We follow Sam, played by Gabrielle Brooks, who has been haunted by a sigil and odd dreams since she was a child. She sees the same symbol on a statue in Billis's antique shop, and then all hell breaks loose. It feels like Goosebumps for grown-ups, and Murray Melvin is predictably brilliant and creepy in one of his last performances before his passing in 2023. He's mainly a supporting character in Sam's story, as we follow her through some freaky dream sequences, effective body horror, and an existential open ending. Now for something completely different, with Dog Hop by Lauren Mooney and Stuart Pringle, which follows PC Andy, who befriends a local bar manager who starts to suspect that her neighbours, including the pub landlord, are swapping bodies with their dogs, and it all has to do with the local rejuvenating health clinic that's opened up across the road. Like Sigil, this seems like it could be a Goosebumps episode because it's such a bonkers premise. The ending is really entertaining, there's a lot of will they won't they romance with Andy and the bar manager, but that's kind of it. It is what it is, an hour-long Torchwood story where PC Andy uncovers a dog-hopping conspiracy. Torchwood at Big Finish capped off 2023 with another trilogy of stories, this time revolving around the Ood and the cast of The Impossible Planet back in 2006. Firstly, we have Odyssey by Patrick O'Connor and starring Claire Rushbrook as Ida Scott, as we learn about the relationship she had with her father. Odysseus, played by Silas Carson, who also plays the Ood in these three stories. Odysseus is dying and is dabbling in gravitational therapy by tapping into resources from the dawn of time. The closest recent comparison I can compare Odyssey to is Dead Space, with a sprinkling of Prometheus but significantly better than Prometheus. It's a fascinating cosmic horror character piece with really strong performances and is one of the best Torchwood stories of the year, as well as being my favourite from the Ood trilogy. Next we have Ood on It by James Goss, featuring Sean Parks as Zachary Cross Flane, who has been sent to investigate the murder of an Ood at a waste disposal plant. It's a strong murder mystery story, with effective class commentary about Ood and workers' rights. The standout character here is Synth, played by Amanda Shideko, and she also works with Torchwood. I want to hear more from her. There's strong set pieces, and while the ending is a bit too clean for me, there's a lot going on, and I enjoyed this whodunit a lot. And lastly, we have Oracle by Ash Darby, which follows Ronnie Duty as Danny Bartok. Torchwood task him with investigating a crashed ship on a lava world. The ship has come from 1,000 years in the future, and it's up to Danny as an ethics expert to decide what should be done with all the future knowledge and technology contained within. It's a fascinating ethical question, there's some creepy Ood moments as well. Silas Carson is great across all of these stories, there's some great horror moments and brilliant dark character work. It's a jam-packed hour of audio, and I really liked it. And that's Torchwood for 2023. However, we're not done with Doctor Who spin-offs yet, because the best is yet to come. While Big Finish produced a bunch of class audio box sets between 2018 and 2020, their contract prevented them from taking the characters further than the season finale. With The Secret Diary of a Rhodian Prince, written by series composer Blair Mowat, that contract has clearly changed, as we get some scenes that move the class universe forward, and may even lay groundwork for future stories. Now, for those expecting the cliffhanger endings of the series to be resolved from the body-swapped April, Miss Quill's baby, or the Weeping Angel connections at Coal Hill School, you're not going to get that here. But what you are going to get is a sweet recalibration of the series as we lay some groundwork between Charlie and Mateus, played by Greg Austin and Jordan Renzo respectively. It's framed as diary entries across the school year, and there's some nice character beats, some very sweet and earnest moments of young queer love, and I hope we see more of this universe sooner rather than later. The potential is certainly there. Right, we're not done yet. Let's move on to companion-centric spin-offs. Let's start with the Doctor's wife, River Song. 2023 saw the end of the Diary of River Song range, which has been going on since 2015, with Alex Kingston reprising her role. The range went out with a bang this year, starting with Series 11, Friend of the Family, a 4-part, multi-generational epic written by Tim Foley, which sees River Song exploring a temporal anomaly which centres around the Mortimer family, which River establishes herself within and travels with her vortex manipulator to key moments in this family's history to learn the secrets within the home. This came out in January and started the year off incredibly strongly. It's genuinely hard for me to understate how wonderful a release this is, with such brilliantly well fleshed out characters that we've come to expect from Tim Foley, but to see it pan out gradually over the course of 4 hours is so rewarding. It's so intricately plotted with brilliant attention to detail that I can only imagine Tim had a full family tree mapped out in order to keep track of everything going on here. I could talk about how much I love the inclusion of Hugo, River Song's holographic companion played by Mark Elstop, who I really hope Big Finish brings back. I could talk about how the story lovingly draws from similar fiction like The Time Traveler's Wife and What Remains of Edith Finch to tell a story to humanize River Song's relationship with history as a training archaeologist, how it deftly manages its tone by ripping your heart out in the tragedy of this doomed family trapped within a spider's web of grandfather paradoxes, whilst also having genuine warmth, humor, and humanity. I could do that, but I'm still afraid that I would be underselling my adoration for this box set, with Alex Kingston giving one of her best performances as the character, particularly in Part 4. Easily one of the best of the year, and one of the best Big Finish box sets I've ever listened to. Series 12, The Orphan Quartet, might not be as emotionally loaded as A Friend of the Family, but it's still a very fitting send-off for this range, as we get a quartet of stories revolving around the themes of losing family. It starts with The Excisemen by Lou Morgan, a nautical horror story set in a Cornish coastal town in the 18th century under attack by mysterious creatures, an attack spearheaded by the agent of the Excisemen, played by Derek Elroy, in a deliciously sadistic performance. Creepy fun, some great comedic moments as well. This was a strong start. Next, we've got possibly the most anticipated story of the box set, the long-awaited River Song and Jackie Tyler story with Crotons to boot, Harvest of the Crotons by James Goss. The story revolves around an alien health spa, but has really interesting commentary on washed-up celebrities or Z-list celebrities who end up in gossip magazines or sell cosmetics or supplements. But it's lovely to hear Alex Kingston and Camille Coduri get genuinely earnest conversations with each other about being left behind by the Doctor, with their family like Rose and Amy being whisked away across time and space, which results in them being alone. It's really lovely to hear, and also ties into writer and producer James Goss's claim that this box set takes place shortly after the events of The Angels Take Manhattan, where River has said goodbye to her parents. For the third story, as if Tim Foley hadn't written enough bangers this year, we have Dead Man Talking, which is a supernatural drama that follows River Song visiting a house on Earth where Mr. Prendergast lives, played by Carol Royal. She's grieving her son, who was killed in a war, leaving behind only his helmet, and through a medium, Stanley, played by Irvine Iqbal, the three try to commune with the dead. It's a brilliant story that I can't talk too much about, because in the third act, there's an astonishingly well-executed twist that floored me when I first heard it. Just rest assured that this is an absolute banger, with a small but terrific cast and a really emotional ending. And lastly, we have The Wife of River Song, written by Lizzie Hopley, which reunites River Song with her sister, Brooke, played by Nina Toussaint White. She's another River from Demon's Run that we met in a prior box set, which is cool context, but you can listen to this story without it. So the story is set on a space station called the Hive, and there, River Song meets a woman called Jane, played by Sarah Jane Potts, who claims to be River's wife, but in her personal future. But before they can deal with that, there's a mysterious plague on board the Hive which has wiped out its inhabitants, and Brooke might be responsible. Unfortunately, I think the River Song's wife story and the reunion of Brooke causes too much division within the script. Like, these two finales are fighting for space here, despite Nina Toussaint White clearly having a great time with the material. There's a reason Silence in the Library and Forest of the Dead in Series 4 of the TV show is a two-parter. Also, while this isn't necessarily the end of River Song's story or even her time at Big Finish, I thought there might be a full stop here, as opposed to what we actually get, which is just a normal ending to cap off nearly 10 years of consistent audio dramas. All in all, River Song had a fantastic year at Big Finish, with her main range coming to a very satisfying end. At time of releasing this video, the follow-up range has started, The Death and Life of River Song, but I've not listened to it yet. But if they're even half as good as what we got this year, we're in for years worth of more brilliant adventures with the Doctor's wife. Speaking of the important women in the Doctor's life, Big Finish celebrated International Women's Day with another The 8th of March set, entitled Strange Chemistry. We have two stories, a Fourth Doctor and Leela story revolving around Marie Curie in 1921, written by Louise Jameson, entitled A Ghost of Alchemy, and a young Amelia Pond prequel story featuring Missy called Fairies at the Bottom of the Garden by Carissa Hamilton Bannis. A Ghost of Alchemy is a pure historical where the Fourth Doctor and Leela join Marie Curie during her trip across America, and it's clearly a passion project for Louise Jameson, with there being many scenes where Leela is giving pep talks and words of encouragement to a very anxious and very exhausted Marie Curie, whose work is trying to be stifled by a rival scientist who is just a massive misogynist. There's also some fun Tom Baker action as well, but this is a story where the women are front and centre, and it's a heartfelt four-parter. The second story, The Fairies at the Bottom of the Garden, casts Caitlin Blackwood as a teenage Amelia Pond who is causing trouble at school and is assigned a therapist who winds up being Missy, played by Michelle Gomez. This results in a short but very enjoyable audio story that allows Michelle Gomez to really lean into the character's playful side, though I do wish there were more interactions between our two leads. In fact, the story takes a lengthy tangent midway through to explain how Missy wound up becoming Amelia's therapist, and I honestly don't think it was necessary. She's the master. Randomly showing up after escaping certain death is kind of their thing. Still, it's a really inventive premise with a cool fairy tale B-plot, and I did enjoy hearing this chapter of Amelia Pond's life. Next up, we have a sequel series to the Sarah Jane Adventures, which, looking back, I maybe should have put in the spin-off section alongside Torchwood and Class, but I am 25,000 words deep and I'm losing my mind a bit. So, Rani Takes on the World takes place several years after the events of the Sarah Jane Adventures. Sarah Jane has passed away, and the children of Bannerman Road have grown up and gone their separate ways, with Rani Chandra, played by Anjali Mahindra, becoming a well-renowned podcast journalist. The first box set is Beyond Bannerman Road, and reunited Rani with Clyde Langer, played by Daniel Anthony, in their opening story, Here Today, by Joseph Lidster. It's a really novel time loop story, where a crashed spaceship in Ealing results in London's destruction and causes the evening to repeat itself, with Rani and Clyde the only ones aware of the loop. It's a really lovely story which catches listeners up to speed with the main character's anxiety of adulthood, like Rani overworking, Clyde about to become a dad, but there's also a B-plot with this woman, Patricia, played by Yvonne Alpera, which just tugs at your heartstrings. I think tonally, Joseph Lidster absolutely hit the nail on the head by taking the spirit of the Sarah Jane Adventures and applying it here by having a compassionate, non-violent solution to the conflict. It's really, really lovely, and probably my favourite Rani Takes on the World story of this year. Next up, we have Destination Wedding by James Goss, which sees Rani and her mother Geeta, played by Meena Anwar, invited to a luxury wedding where an old friend is getting married to a movie star. However, people are going missing. The invitation was suspicious at best, and the bread on the dinner table is going mouldy unusually quickly. It's a fun, slow burn mystery that ties into similar themes that Here Again did, about growing up and how you can choose to let your past experiences define you. There's a strong thematic through line throughout this box set that I really appreciated about it, which leads into the next story, The Witching Tree by Lizzie Hopley, which sees Rani and her podcast friend Samira, played by Raghad Char, investigate a supposedly haunted restaurant. Clyde gets involved, Tyler from the Torchwood series shows up for some reason, and it's formatted like an episode of Rani's podcast. It's genuinely creepy, has a great premise, and I think Anjali Mahindra is terrific as well. It's a really strong box set overall, and I think I might be underselling it a bit. I think that if you have zero attachment to the Sarah Jane Adventures, this is a safe skip. However, if you grew up with these characters, and are now approaching their age now, I think you'll really be rewarded here, because it continues their journeys in a really respectful and thoughtful way, and I think this team of writers were perfect to bring these characters into a new era. But we're not done with them yet, because Mrs. Wormwood returns in another box set. Rani takes on the world, The Revenge of Wormwood, which also sees the return of Luke Smith, played by Tommy Knight. And I think it's where we find Luke's character in the first story, Time Schisms by Elizabeth Miles. It's one of the more interesting parts of the series. Whilst Clyde is trying to live a normal life, and Rani is trying to fight the system through her journalism, Luke has become a part of the system, working at UNIT, and at one point is even made to try and warn Rani off from her investigation, a mystery revolving around a post office worker who a podcast listener believes to be a time traveller. Much like Here Today, this is a great story that would slot perfectly into the Sarah Jane Adventures in terms of its twist, its resolution, and wonderful handle on tone, and how Rani is struggling to carry the mantle of Sarah Jane, who is a hopeful, incorruptible figure. Next up we have The Star-Crossed Diversion by Alison Winter, and this seems to draw some inspiration, perhaps unintentionally, from an unmade episode of the Sarah Jane Adventures, which sees Rani and Clyde falling asleep on the night tube and waking up in a parallel dystopian Earth where everyone spends all day playing mobile games. This is all in aid of the Bane, who are aiming to turn the people of this world docile for their nefarious ends. This easily could have been another Phones Bad story, but rather this story is more nuanced and hones in on the idea of an apathetic humanity sleepwalking into the apocalypse. A solid story bolstered by great performances by Madison Bollyment as an alternative Luke and Milo Twomey deliciously voicing the main antagonist. And lastly, we get The Ghost of Bannerman Road by Jonathan Morris, which sees Samantha Bond return as Wormwood to get her revenge, as the box set title implies. Since Sarah Jane's death, 13 Bannerman Road has been left to Rani, but UNIT are investigating a supposed ghost on the premises. People with regrets in their life are disappearing, and that even involves Clyde and his massive crush on Rani, which Wormwood hopes to exploit. On paper, this looks set to be a satisfying finale, but honestly I felt a bit let down by it, because while Samantha Bond is terrific, she actually hardly has anything to do, and her plan is almost comically easy to stop, especially since she's apparently been planning this for about a decade. It starts off with a cool premise, but I don't think the Bane make for a particularly interesting villain anymore, at least in this form. Oh, and Luke is here as well, but he and Mrs. Wormwood get shockingly few interactions here, especially considering how passionate Mrs. Wormwood originally was about being Luke's real mother. I don't know, I just think a few tricks were missed here. I liked the box set overall, but I think it was a step down from Beyond Bannerman Road. Still, I'm excited for what the future of these characters might be with Big Finish, whether it's Sadie Miller returning to finish the original Series 5, or tell new stories, or if they continue this sequel series focusing on Rani. I'm happy with whatever they do. Now we return to another companion, Rose Tyler, who in 2022 was stuck on a world about to be snuffed out by the reality bomb with an alternate version of herself and her family. Well, now we pick off where we left off with the Dimension Canon 3, Trapped, which departs from the original format of the box sets that saw Rose going from doomed world to doomed world, and instead traps her in a single dimension for a trilogy of stories with some of Big Finish's heavy hitter writers. We have Sink or Swim by Lizzie Hopley, which shows that Rose did manage to escape, but has now landed on a post-apocalyptic water world. Her dimension canon has been damaged, and she's stuck on a boat with an untrustworthy faction of what remains of humanity. Her mother is in chains in the basement, and Rose must team up with an alternate version of herself, in this case the non-binary Danny, voiced by Emma Thane, to escape this world. And That's M. Thane voicing a non-binary parallel Rose and Madison Bullimont voicing a non-binary Luke in the Revenge of Wormwood box set. If I had a nickel for every 2023 Big Finish story that had a non-binary alternative companion character in stories produced by Emily Cook, I'd have 2 nickels.
Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
Anyway, along with stories The Lower Road by Tim Foley and Good Samaritan by Helen Goldwyn, we essentially have Doctor Who's equivalent of The Last of Us, where Rose and Danny trek across the post-apocalypse, and it's a strong box set on that level. I don't think anything will top the gut punch surprise of that first box set being so surprisingly dark and affecting, but Rose Tyler and M. Thane are great together. There's some interesting moral dilemmas as Rose's unshakable moral compass is put in a world with no use for her. We have Heather Coombs giving one of the best guest star performances of the year in a really sensitive story about family relationships. My only complaint with the box set is that I wish there was a lengthier epilogue at the end. The ending of Trapped ties directly into Turn Left in Series 4, but considering what Rose goes through in this story and how long she was on this doomed Earth, I wish we could have dealt with that a bit, but still a terrific release. Now let's talk adjacent characters, and I see no reason why we shouldn't start with Doom.
Hi, I'm Doom. Blame my mother.
So Doomsday was a transmedia story told across different mediums in 2023, which follows Assassin Doom, played by Suze Kempner, across the last day of her life as she's being pursued by literal death. We had comics, games, books, and also audio stories with a Big Finish box set, Dying Hours, following Doom between hours 20 and 23. A fun conceit, and you know what, I think the series got a bad rap, but we'll save that for another video. In Dying Hours, we got a quadrilogy of stories, starting with Dawn of an Everlasting Peace by Jacqueline Rayner, which sees Doom caught in a fun conspiracy romp with the bad guys from the Daleks' master plan. It's a fun Douglas Adams-style adventure with some clever twists and turns, and a lot of offbeat characters, with an oddly well-executed emotional core. I liked this a lot. Next up, A Date with Destiny by Robert Valentine is the long-awaited Doom and Jackie Tyler crossover, as Doom is trying to find the 10th Doctor and Rose, but winds up caught in the aftermath of them breaking up an alien crime syndicate. The gangsters try to kill Jackie Tyler to teach the Doctor and Rose a lesson, with Doom being the only one who can save her. Throw in another assassin, Destiny, played by Yasmin Bannerman, and you have the most pure fun story of the box set. We also get to hear Doom try and gain Jackie's trust by pretending to be the Doctor, which makes for an entertaining first half. It moves too quickly for you to really think about it, but I really enjoyed this. However, the third story, The Howling Wolves of Zampeer by Simon Clarke, I really wasn't a fan of this one. The story features the Silents, who are already a tough nut to crack in the audio medium, but I just found it to be a pretty boring and laborious story, and it doesn't even work with the hour-long format of Doomsday because the characters are supposedly losing their memories all the time. The supporting cast are stock, the Silents plan doesn't make any sense, and I don't even know why they bothered with it, and I just don't think this one had much to offer. I love how the story plays with the dynamic of Doom and her sardonic, exasperated secretary Terry, played by Becky Wright, but this one was a miss for me overall. And lastly, we get the 8th Doctor and Charlie encountering Doom in The Crowd, written by Lizzie Hopley. Doom is spending these 24 hours looking for a specific incarnation, and unfortunately, Paul McGann is not the one, but there's ambiguity as to whether or not this version will help an assassin. Doom's mission is to take down a member of a species known as the Crowd. However, their race act as a collective, so Doom needs to take down multiple targets, and it's such an inventive idea for a species who absorb the grief from tragic historical events that I'd love to see Big Finish explore again at some point. I also think that Suze Kempner really rose to the occasion here as Doom. In the penultimate hour of her life, she's getting increasingly desperate for an escape from death. She's a great actress for the whole box set, but in The Crowd, she's especially great. Doomsday Dying Hours is tough to recommend if you're not remotely invested in the transmedia story, but I had a really good time with most of it, and I think it's one of the best parts of the event, though I'm terrible and still haven't read the book yet, I'm sorry. Anyway, to finish off this section, we've got one of my favourite Dark Horse Rangers from Big Finish, and that's the Paternoster Gang, the misadventures of Strax the Sontaran, Vastra the Silurian, and Jenny the Kung Fu maid in Victorian England. 2023 saw the start of a brand new story arc for the group, making Trespassers Volume 1 Rogues Gallery an effective jumping on point, and jump on you should, because these are really fun. Starting with the Ghost and the Potato Man, Vastra is brought in to solve a series of robberies happening by blue spectres which occur concurrently. One of these takes place at a nearby pub where performers entertain the drunken crowds, and Strax winds up becoming the latest new attraction through his unintentional stand-up comedy. Yes, it's that type of story, and it's brilliant. The story takes some cool turns in this entertaining heist. I just wish that the Strax story wound up connecting more, with it just being resolved off-screen. Next up, we have a story penned by Strax actor Dan Starkey, entitled Symmetry of Death, which is an unabashed Sherlock Holmes-style mystery homage, with the Paternoster Gang attempting to solve a murder that happened to someone alone in a locked room. It's not revolutionary, there aren't any massive surprises, but it's a well-crafted mystery thriller. It's cool to see Vastra get emotionally involved in the case, but I don't have too much more to say about this. And lastly, we have the long-anticipated wedding between Vastra and Jenny in Till Death Us Do Part by Lisa McMullen. After several teases as to which Doctor was lucky enough to attend this wedding, we finally learn that it was the 8th incarnation. But that's not all, as there's doppelgangers roaming the streets, and that ties into Miss Faversham, played by Beth Chalmers, being left at the altar by the 8th Doctor, and having her life story apparently stolen by Charles Dickens for Great Expectations. It's bonkers, it's fun, it's what you want from the Paternoster Gang, with genuine laugh-out-loud dialogue, charming character work, and a cliffhanger ending which leads into future box sets that released in 2024 and beyond. If you have the spare time and income, I definitely recommend giving this corner of Big Finish a try. It's charming fun, with great actors telling heartfelt stories. Anyway, the finish line is in sight. Let's head back into the Time War with the Gallifrey series. All was quiet on the Western Front this year, with just one Gallifrey box set, the second installment in their War Room range, War Room 2 Maneuvers. Viewers of mine might remember I was a bit mixed on the first box set, but I think this box set is a significant step up in quality, where it's basically Doctor Who meets Succession, as all these different personalities and factions in the Time War are vying for power and different ways to end the conflict. We have 4 separate stories, but there's some overarching narrative threads throughout, starting with Collaborators by Catherine Armitage. We have the planet Orison, which has a special resource the Time Lords want to exploit. You have Leela, working for the Resistance, who wants to warn the people of Orison to stay as far away from the Time War as possible, and then you have the General, who wants to offer an alliance in exchange for protection from the Daleks. You have the newly ascended to the throne King Ferdy, played by James Corrigan, giving a terrific performance, who wants to make a strong first impression with his people that further complicates things. It's an effective political drama that ends strongly, and it's exactly the type of story I want from this range. Next up, there's Remnants by Georgia Cook, which sees the War Room receive a distress signal from a Gallifreyan research station. The General, Commander Veclan, and Rasmus arrive too late, however, as its occupants have almost been entirely exterminated by a Dalek berserker. If the last story was like Succession, this one is more overtly like Alien, with a bunch of characters trapped in a space station setting with the ultimate killing machine, and someone involved also has their own morally dubious covert mission. I liked this one a lot, but I think it was hurt by the timing of its release, as it came out after a War Doctor story that had almost the exact same premise, even down to the class of Dalek in this isolated setting. It's a shame, because Remnants is an effective story, and it's also refreshing to remove Leela from the situation and see how these Time Lords react to fighting in the field. Next up, there's Transference by Theo Trethui, which opens with a Time Lord presenting a new weapon to the War Council, only to be assassinated. Leela follows the trail outside of the building to Lowtown and uncovers a larger scheme at play. I love the Gallifreyan world building as we hear more of Lowtown, and while I can't say too much due to the twist the story has to offer, I think fans of Narvin, played by Sean Carlson, will be very well served. Also, damn is Olistra a piece of work in this story, god damn. Anyway, lastly, there's Ambition's Debt by Catherine Armitage, which follows on from the events of Collaborators, where Orison has gone missing, and the Daleks are suspiciously quiet. Now, much like Collaborators, this was the effective political drama I come to these box sets for. However, I think one issue this range is running into is that it wants to establish new characters and then either immediately kill them off, or immediately do high-stakes personal drama with them, whilst the main characters who have been a part of this range for literally decades at this point have no chance of being killed off. It creates an odd dynamic where you have war stories where none of the main cast are allowed to die, but when a new character in Ambition's Debt had a game-changing twist, I had no idea who they were. I'm so sorry, I was so confused. Aside from that though, the interpersonal conflicts, the fighting for control of the war room, the double crosses, the scheming behind the scenes, this is the political intrigue that I'm here for, and Catherine Armitage handles that brilliantly. Part 3 was meant to come out in 2024, but was delayed for unknown reasons, so we don't have any further details on the next release, which is set to drop in November 2025, but hopefully they learn the right lessons from this box set when they continue this epic saga. Next up, we turn to Doctor Who's villains, with the Master. There are multiple incarnations that Big Finish have on the go at the moment, and while we've had a few Missy stories this year, in terms of dedicated box sets, there was only one, the War Master, who got 2 box sets this year. The Escape from Reality box set wound up as my number 2 release of 2022, so let's see if these can scale to similar heights. Firstly, we have Solitary Confinement, a 4-part box set with the framing device of the War Master, played by Derek Jacobi, receiving treatment at the Drain Institute. He doesn't remember how he got there, but he tries to regain his memories with the help of the staff there by telling these stories of how he got into this mess, starting with The Walls of Absence by James Goss. This follows the Code Purgers of Chift, a neutral party in the Time War who are world-renowned code breakers, and the Master enlists one of them, Mendrix, played by Sian Phillips, to help him learn what's wrong with his brain. The Master does not tell Mendrix who he is to try and gain her trust, but what's kind of inevitable is that due to the nature of the story, we know exactly how this story is going to end. We know when the rug pull is going to happen, and we know that the War Master always wins. It's solid, but if you've listened to basically any Big Finish War Master story, you've heard this one before. It was fun for Jacobi and Phillips to have an I, Claudius reunion though, and while there are some brilliant standalone scenes and James Goss's trademark strong dialogue and character work, it felt quite samey. Next up is The Long Despair by Tim Foley, where the Master is essentially narrating his own version of Moby Dick, which sees him enlisting a sea captain played by Jason Fleming to get to a lighthouse on the ocean world of Murky. It's the highlight of the box set in my opinion, and it's a really creepy and tense seafaring adventure as the Master and the Captain have to face several trials on the course of the adventure. Derek Jacobi is always great in these box sets and always seems engaged with the material, but here he seems to be having an especially good time. The soundscapes are so effective and the ending is an absolute killer. Love it, love it, love it. Now we go from Moby Dick to Black Mirror, with The Life and Loves of Mr. Alexander Bennett, which stars Jacob Dudman as Alexander Bennett, who is a normal guy with a normal job and normal girlfriend, and he's recently bought a new Alexa-style home assistant called Meizu, voiced by Derek Jacobi. And the next 60 minutes are just how the Master, under the guise of this assistant, tries to destroy Alex's life. It reminds me of the Torchwood story, Colin Alone, but this time it has the technological angle, anchored by a brilliantly grounded performance by Dudman. And finally, we have the finale, which takes place in the Drain Institute as the Master plays his hand and tries to engineer an escape in The Kicker, written by Trevor Baxendale, which is a shame. A member of the Temporal Inquisition is sent to test him to see if the Master really is the Master. And while this results in some engaging conversations, it means we have a finale that meanders up until the final few minutes when the Master finally starts enacting his scheme. It works as a finale, and I'll admit I did not see the ending twist coming. However, I'm not sure if the solitary confinement theme on its own sustained the box set, especially since the two middle chapters, which are basically standalone, were the easy standout stories here. But we get the next War Master set, Rogue Encounters, which tells 4 unconnected standalone stories. Firstly, we have Runtime by Tim Foley, which takes inspiration from the film 1917, which is a war story following a small cast trekking their way across a battlefield in real time. The War Master has 1 hour to save a planet from the Daleks in the Time War and teams up with Soldier Slug, played by H. Wiley, to do so. It's really cool to hear the Master with his own surrogate companion, and there's some brilliant set pieces, including a Dalek-infested swamp where the Master and Slug have to hop over exposed Dalek head domes to cross. It's been like 8 months since I first listened to this box set, and I still remember that set piece so vividly. Such a great story. Next we have Manhunt by Roshana Patel, which is set in 1950s America, where Allison, played by Loris Harrison, is accused of killing her boyfriend, but she's adamant that she's been set up. We're dealing with men in black, little grey aliens in the vein of Roswell, and the War Master is claiming to be able to help her through hypnotherapy. It's great to have a story framed from another character's point of view for this unfolding mystery, so we can see how an outsider can be so easily tempted and tricked by the Master. It's so sadistic to see the Master effectively playing with his food, but Allison is going to provide more fight than the Master might be used to, and it's a thrilling and creepy third act. And we're approaching the end with our 2 cover stories of the box set. The first of which is The Sublime Port by James Goss, which opens with the Master having already infiltrated an archaeological expedition on the planet Karsh, and he and the other archaeologists accidentally uncover an ancient evil in the form of Billis Manger, in Murray Melvin's final performance in the role. The Master is the only one who can see and hear Billis, and is deathly afraid of this entity, which, while I won't spoil here, is given a name and a role in the universe because we finally have a character like the Master who can contextualize him for the audience. I wish Derek and Murray got more scenes together, but as a story it's enthralling, as we have the Master on the back foot and attempting to flee for his life, but his TARDIS is missing and Billis is about to destroy this world, but I won't tell you how this one ends. And finally, the last review of this mammoth retrospective, we have Alone by Scott Handcock, which does not feature the War Master. No, instead, we're following Professor Yana before the events of the Series 3 episode Utopia. This professor, travelling alone with a fob watch in his jacket, trying to get by at the end of the universe. On his travels, he meets a young man called Rafe, played by James G. Nunn, and he becomes the son that Yana never had. However, Yana might be cursed to be alone forever, as fate conspires around him to ensure he'll never have a happy ending. It's incredible to hear Derek Jacobi so effortlessly switch to the demure and mindful Professor Yana, who couldn't be more different from the Master, which makes this a full-blown tragedy that shockingly contextualizes and makes even more effective one of the best guest appearances in Doctor Who TV history. Rogue Encounters is stellar, opening with 2 brilliant but more or less traditional War Master stories, and ending with 2 very experimental and different facets of this personality. There's one more War Master box set in the pipeline due to come out in late 2024, and that looks set to be the last one of this current range, as producer Scott Handcock went on to become the official Doctor Who TV series script editor. So let's hope that it can live up to what's come before. Now, before we end things, let's quickly go through what I didn't listen to in 2023 for one reason or another. Short Trips Volume 12, I just didn't get around to it, unfortunately. I must have been really busy that month. We also have The Robots Volume 6, which I didn't listen to because I've not listened to any of Volumes 1 to 5. Same for Unit Nemesis Volume 4, Masters of Time, as I haven't listened to Volumes 1 to 3. And we had the recreation of the original draft of The Ark in Space. My plan was to watch The Ark in Space and then listen to this, but I never got around to watching it, so that just didn't happen. Also, I've not listened to any Iris Wildtime, who had a trilogy of stories this year. I have no idea what this is, I'm sorry. So, God, in 2023, I only skipped on 7 releases across Big Finish's Doctor Who range, and even then, 3 of them were part of a trilogy. So there we are, folks. That's it. I listened to about 98% of Big Finish's Doctor Who releases this year, which amounted to 133 separate stories across 61 releases. It's a lot of material, which is why so many of you folks said you wanted me to make this a yearly tradition on this channel, so that you can get a comprehensive look at the year of the busiest corner of the Doctor Who universe and figure out what I recommend. With that being said, after days, weeks, months of consideration, here are my absolute favourites. Firstly though, a quick honourable mention to the 10th Doctor Chronicles, Defender of the Earth, Torchwood, the last love song of Susie Costello, the First Doctor Adventures, The Demon Song, the 6th Doctor Adventures, Purity Unleashed, and Rani Takes on the World, Beyond Bannerman Road. Now, without further ado, my top 10 Big Finish box sets of 2023. Number 10, the 9th Doctor Adventures, Shades of Fear. Number 9, the 2nd Doctor Adventures, James Robert McCrimmon. Number 8, Rose Tyler Dimension Canon, Trapped. Number 7, the 7th Doctor Adventures, Far From Home. Number 6, the 5th Doctor Adventures, In the Night. Number 5, the 4th Doctor Adventures, Angels and Demons. Number 4, The War Master, Rogue Encounters. Number 3, The War Doctor Begins, Enemy Mine. Number 2, The 11th Doctor Chronicles, Everywhere and Anywhere. And number 1, The Diary of River Song, Friend of the Family. Honestly, don't take the ranking of that list too seriously outside of the top 5. I threw in the honourable mentions because the standard was just so high. And lastly, before I finish, shout out to a recurring name over the course of this video, and that's Tim Foley, who wrote my favourite stories of this year, like, yes, Friend of the Family, but also Pursuit of the Nightjar, Cuckoo, The Ghost of Margaret, The Lower Road, Runtime, All of Time and Space, Dead Man Talking, just to name a few. The guy's been a machine this year, and cemented himself as one of my favourite Doctor Who writers of all time. For the love of stories, I'll see you next time. Hey folks, thank you so much for watching this epic retrospective into the past year of Big Finish. I know that this video is several months late, but as you can see by the runtime, it was a pretty big project, and it's been an incredibly busy summer for me as well. These bags under my eyes are not just from listening to over 100 Big Finish stories, but it's just been a pretty brutal schedule for me over the past couple of months. However, you folks watching and supporting me means the world to me. If you did enjoy this video, hit the like button, leave a comment down below what's your favourite or least favourite Big Finish story of 2023. Also, while this video was being made, I opened up YouTube membership, so now I have YouTube members who are also going to be in the credits along with my patrons. YouTube members and patrons, they get early access to videos, they can get access to a Mr. TARDIS Discord server if they're in the correct tier, and I want to give a shout out to these particular members and patrons: Quinny, Adam Grattan, Ben Langdon, Tuba City Blues, Dan, Daniel Davis, DC63 Productions, Dean Jones, Dylan Whitaker, Air Hoovian, High Lord Wolnir, Jack D. Evans, Joseph Adams, Lard Dragon Ezra, Leela, Maria Bergman, Marianne Mogensen, Mario Fanboy 15, Michael Serrano, Miranda Logan, Palex, Randall Sprinkle, Raven Woods, Reese Lloyd, RJL, Ross A.T. Stewart, Rusty Dalek, Ryan Duncan, Sam Montgomery, Samuel Whitaker, The Brit Sniper, The Scarlet Watcher, and Will. Thanks so much to all of my members and my patrons, thanks to you for watching, and I'll see you all next time.